Ah, looks like we're live. Good morning, Grill Country, just chatting, people of the TLC. Um, yeah, I was listening to Paul had a video yesterday that he put out, at least a clip of a longer video that's going to come out, and it really, I think it's really good. And I think one of the things that for those of us, Paul, one of the things he does is he's kind of tracking kind of what's going on within the CRC. And for some of us, it's really interesting. I would put there are some of us that are church nerds that follow these sorts of things. We've lived through, well, all of us have lived through this cultural moment and what's been going on, to the church, like the church in America, because it's all caught up in culture and everything else that we're doing. Others of us have been trying to plant churches and do things in this kind of context. And so really what you see happening kind of within the CRC is a microcosm of kind of the macrocosm of kind of what we're experiencing here. I think in the West, but I can only speak about the United States. Um, and the other thing that I realized what's happening here is I know that there are a lot of Dutch distinctives that the CRCNA is trying to hold on to. But the fact of the matter is, what I see playing out in at large is it's just milk toast what every other mainline church has gone through. And so the people, the culture that they've lived in, that they've lived in, whether you are conservative or whether you're right or left, just using those terms loosely, um, both sides of the church have been kind of consumed in that. And the things that you see playing out, I mean, there is this sense of this longing for the Dutch distinctive, but that distinctive's gone, and it doesn't look any different. There are some people that are trying to hold on to some things, some familial things. There were some uniqueness about this, but the people that are in the midst of this now are no different, and the arguments are no different than what you're seeing kind of in other places. And I think it's important. I'm going to play a little bit of what Paul has there, and I think it's this theme that I've been trying to talk about because, and what this isn't. Okay, so this is not what this isn't, and I think this conversation is boring. So hopefully, when we have some conversations about it, we don't go to this. This isn't ortho versus Protestant. Okay, this is not the thing that I've been noticing for over 15 years before I even had any understanding what orthodoxy is. But there's this move that's happening um, as the church and both sides of the church, as you start seeing things fall away and you see this rise of the nuns and some of these other things that are happening, um, that there's something larger going on here. And I've kind of come back here and I've talked a lot about there's this move towards traditional. That you're starting to see this move, which is fascinating because everyone would have thought in the 90s and the 2000s and 2010s that if you weren't becoming more relevant and cool and all this other sort of stuff, there's no way that people would be willing to seek you out. And yet we're starting to see this shift turn back. And Paul even mentions it in the video that he had today with it's Clay Leibel. I can't remember. I know the other. I'll look at it. I'll get the name right. But anyway, I wanted to highlight a couple things because the conversation that I want to have is I think it's also what's happening out there is the reason why we have the rise of the TLC in the estuary, because as the culture has consumed the church, breaking out in different ways, a lack of depth has created meaning crises and people leaving the church. People are desiring to talk about things more deeply, which would describe a lot of us as I think why we're here. Um, Alex, who's new to this little corner and has started to emerge in, he's gone from working into now actually putting out some videos and stuff. I think there's something else to put there. So I want to play a little bit from PVK's video from yesterday. And then I want to play something else. And then I kind of have a few comments. And I think it's, anyway, I'm trying to put to words something that I'm seeing, and it's not ortho versus Protestant. There's this desire, this thing that people are seeing the cultural moments and what has happened to those, whether you're right or left, and what that's and the church's reaction to that, specifically the only thing I know in America, and how that's been found wanting, and we find ourselves in this really interesting moment. So let me play a little bit here from Paul's video. Maybe we can spark some of this conversation here. All right, here we go. Share.
System, the feeder system. What I had noticed in the last 10, 15 years here is not that Calvin grads no longer move to Sacramento. They do.
But they don't look up Reformed churches.
They don't go to any church.
So that could be too. Yeah.
No, that not that could be.
That is okay.
That is.
All right.
So in this video at the beginning, they're talking. This is a clip of a larger conversation, and I think, I think in many good ways, Clay was pointing towards, and he was really pointing kind of towards the right and what they were doing. And then Paul's coming in, and he's not disagreeing necessarily with. Listen, this isn't a victory lap for conservatives that I'm trying to make here. But then Paul's going to go on and start talking about some things here about some of the what would be the more progressives, and he's also going to refer to both sides. But what he's pointing out there, I think this is a really big point. So when I have this conversation and I say church is not working in America, and then people will say, well, we have lots of people coming to our church. What that is a reshuffling of the deck chairs. If you look at the numbers, the nuns are just exploding. So yes, people do congregate in certain churches, and you can say, well, our church is a mega, and we do this rock band concert, and they kind of these relevant messages, and a lot of people are coming there, and that's true. But when you zoom out to 40,000 feet, most of the people are leaving. The nuns are on the rise. And this is the point, Paul's making right off the bat, is like when he was talking about some of those of the circulatory system, is it's not just that they aren't going to, it's not just they're going to another church. They're not going to church altogether. So if you get lost in just seeing how things are looking like in your little church, and you don't zoom out and see the larger issue of what's happening, young people are leaving for very good reasons. And many of them are becoming nuns, and that rise is significant. And it doesn't matter whether you're on a more conservative church person in the evangelical mainline America, or whether or not you're a person on the left. That is a reality. And in fact, actually the numbers would support that those who have a left leaning, their kids are leaving church at a faster rate than those with a conservative leaning. But make no mistake, the youth, the young people, the statistics are overwhelmingly showing they're leaving.
Right. Sure.
And so you can tell the story in terms of the rise of evangelicalism. But my real beef with this book isn't that white evangelicals have issues in terms of how they get their religion and their politics mixed up. To me that's a very uninteresting thesis. I think the bigger thesis is that what happened to the main line in American history, because the natural process for the Christian Reformed Church, very much in keeping with the Scandinavians, the Scandinavian evangelicals, the Lutherans. When the Christian Reformed Church 10, 15 years ago wanted to map out their big plan, they looked at the Covenant Church that had been successful in planting megachurches here in Sacramento. This is an area in which the Covenant Church has been enormously successful. Multiple megachurches in the distant suburb of wealthy whites, megachurch in my area, Bayside of South Sacramento, African American leadership. They managed to do what home missions really wanted to do in the 80s and 90s. the Covenant Church managed to do it. Okay. And they managed to do it by basically taking the big box, non-denominational evangelical church and applying it in a way that most Christian Reformed pastors, by virtue of our formation, we just really couldn't do it. We couldn't sort of go full whole hog in that way, because the Christian Reformed Church has been in a process of assimilation. And the two dominant groups, all the way back to the modernist fundamentalist days, have been the mainline and the fundamental.
And it's not just the Christian Reformed Church that has been in a process of assimilation. When he's talking about the mainline, I think he's talking about evangelicalism as a whole too. He's going to go on to talk about how even the CRC, that they were sending their leaders first to see Robert Schuller, but then Willow Creek and Saddleback. Like, man, if you were around, like, that was the model. And what the model was is it was the business leadership model, right? It was the scale model. It was the PowerPoint model. It was the seeker and relevance model. It has been, more called about the consumer church model, right? That was the thing that was happening. And so, I think Paul does a good job with this in this video. And I think we all need to look at this. This is not a left versus right thing. This is a church thing, and how we all have gotten consumed into the mill. Not all of us, but most of us. And I would raise my hand. I was in that thing. We kind of got consumed into this culture, and what we were living in both drove what was happening in what would be more right-leaning conservative expressions than what would be the progressives that had remained there. The assimilation, the church in America, and I think it starts and looks, and we can look at this. I mean, maybe just even say the West. I mean, the Vatican II, and what happened there? There's this massive thing that's very short in church history that started to happen, and it's playing out, and it has played out across the entire mainline, and the CRCNA is not immune from this.
Fundamentalists and the fundamentalists sort of morph into the evangelicals, at least part of them, and the mainline, which had been in many ways the state church of the United States. You see that reflected in FDR. Eleanor Roosevelt was this towering figure, especially, in the formation of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And while on one hand, you can see the assimilation of Christian Reformed people into the evangelical world, you will spot the Left Behind series popping up in places like, I think my mother deep sixed it out of the library at Pleasant Street Christian Reformed Church in Whitensville, Massachusetts. I think she saw it there, and it conveniently got checked out and never returned.
God bless Paul's mother. I love that.
But my mother, of course, born and bred in Whitensville, nobody's going to come after my mother because she's Henry Osterman's daughter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the real question here is, in many ways, there were two tracks in the Christian Reformed Church, the main line and the evangelical, and that assimilation process has continued. The pro-felicity, I'm going to share my screen. Well, let's see. Here, I'm going to share this screen. Do you want to see pro-felicity? Here's pro-felicity. This is pro-felicity of activism. And we've seen, we saw in George Floyd during the pandemic, we saw George Floyd, people on their knees, people praying, people repenting. People were looking at and saying, wow, looks like another great awakening. I mean, outside of synod, these are, let's take from another rather high profile Calvin Seminary professor, James K.A. Smith. These are the liturgies of the civil rights movement, adopted by all of the other liberationist movements hence. And these are within the Christian Reformed Church too. So on one hand, I will agree with you that these liturgies have been taken up by now the new conservatives in the Christian Reformed Church, but they are equally taken up by the other side in the Christian Reformed Church. I don't see a story in which the Christian Reformed Church establishment, rather moderate liberal establishment, sort of looking to the main line as this is the template that we want to follow. I don't see them being any less in terms of profiles as the other. The difference is that the the move towards Americanization, the desire of River Terrace, the desire of home missions in the 80s, 90s, planting Granite Springs in Sacramento, the desire of, sending a bunch of us to Willow Creek, but generation before sending my father to visit Robert Schuller in Southern California. I'm not going to disagree with the Americanization thesis, but you have to apply that across the board. And the key difference is,
and I think that's important. I think when I'm speaking about this thing that I've been seeing, and I've been seeing it for a long time. So if you would have talked to millennials in the late 2000s, early 2010, and when I went to seminary, there were a couple of us old heads that had gone back, but most of the guys in my seminary were millennials. One of the things that you really found was going on, and this was, I don't know, it was early adopters, the leading edge. What you were seeing is they were pushing back very hard against, and so he was pointing to Willow Creek, all these mega church models that they were trying to figure out a way how do we deal with the fact that we're losing our people, right? And so they were trying to figure out all these different models. But and I know a lot of people push back against this word, and he's using this terminology in this kind of authenticity, sincerity, and then prophelicity. But that was the word you would hear from millennials, and they would talk about the things like they wanted to go to a church with stained glass in it, like they wanted the crunchy stuff. I know I say this a lot, but I say this a lot because I heard it. Like I listened to what people were saying, and I heard it. Is they would say, I can go to a better coffee shop than a coffee shop you're trying to run at your church. Like, I can go to a better concert on a Saturday night than the concert you're putting on a Sunday. Like they were seeking kind of the crunchy things. And one of the things that I think you're seeing play out, and like Paul, even mentioned earlier, which is, people are going to come out of Calvin and they're going to go to Sacramento, but they're not going to even go to church, right? Is this idea of that we're losing people, and I think we're losing people for a reason. So, for example, and he pointed it out so well. Like if you're on the left, and the secularity and the cultural moment is really driving most of your world view. The church isn't where that's going to play out the best, even, unless you can try and get some sort of fully affirming church that looks like the secular left movement, which, okay, that's proven to not work, by the way. But at the same time, what we're seeing is the rise of the nuns, or what we're seeing the meaning crisis people is we know that doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's more. There's more that's going on, and I think that's also what you're seeing from what would be even folks out of, and I think Luke Thompson would be the perfect example of this. Like you see the young, restless, and reformed, but you run into all the people that we're running into this little corner. And let's say you even went to more of a conservative, relevant that sort of church. They're leaving in droves too, in terms of, if you look at the overall numbers. And what is it? Like there's this thinness that's happening. Paul mentioned at the end of this, he starts to go talk about, and they start bringing it around. And let me get his name. Kent Hendricks. They start to talk at the very end. There's actually a move back towards a more liturgical frame. And I think that we're seeing this all around. And I want to play this again, just because I think it makes sense. And I'm playing this. Please, let me say this. I'm playing this not because it's orthodox. I'm playing this for a different reason. So again, I'm going to play this little clip again, but I think it matters, and I think it speaks to a lot of why we're all here. I think it speaks to why we're all here.
Yeah, it's not that. The Orthodox Church hasn't done anything to bring these people in. In fact, one of the people that commented said this: I can only speak for our mission. We haven't changed anything to make this happen or to try to draw them. It's just happening. I'm most interested in those who were previously unbelievers or unchurched. Many just felt something was missing, and they stumbled upon orthodoxy somehow, then Googled Orthodox church near me, and voila. That's what this person says. And that's been my experience. I mean, talking to the people that have come into our own parish here in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, but also in a lot of the speaking engagements I've done in places, I've asked people, now, why did you come to the Orthodox Church? What drew you? And almost always you hear people say something was missing. I very rarely hear people talk about ideological commitments that made them want to come. That doesn't mean they're not out there. They are out there. I mean, you can find them on the internet. But I haven't personally experienced this, and none of my responses, of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of responses I've gotten, have people saying that. I'm not saying it's not out there, but I don't.
Something was missing. I've actually heard that sitting in an Orthodox church. I think as you start seeing people in more traditional forms, if you talk to people, if you listen to all of these deconstruction videos, if you listen to Luke, something was missing in the church. And this is, and I want to say this, and this is, if you follow this, and this is where I want to, again, this is not Orthodox versus Protestant. I'm just speaking about the church at large, and particularly the church in America, because that's all I know. Something was missing. The nuns are leaving us in droves. And it really doesn't, in many ways, it doesn't matter whether you were a left-leaning person, although there's more of that. Those of us with a more conservative sort of things. And why is that? I think, we would use things around here that would say that the Sunday school answers weren't good enough for us, that there was a lack of depth. Why are we all coming around to watch this pastor from Sacramento do 2.5 hour videos? Like, people are watching 80 hours of John Vervaeke. We can do just chattings in these long form conversations, and I think that we're a microcosm of what the hunger is out there, and the hunger is depth. People are hungry for depth. They've seen what's happening out there in the culture, and it doesn't matter what side you're on. It is wanting. It's not meeting the needs of what people need. And so that's why I think what you see, and Alex, who's a new person here, has talked about it, lots of folks who have come, is it's people want to have deeper conversations. They want to have the difficult conversations. We have enough of we've had enough of the culture. The culture is not giving us and answering those deep questions. And quite frankly, the church, as Paul had mentioned there, and he was pointing to both sides: the Americanization, the assimilation, the all forms to a certain extent. We found this flourish since Vatican II through to the Jesus movement and the collapse of the main line and the move towards contemporary and all this stuff that we're saying. It's not meeting the moment. Yes, individually, and this is a logical argument. I know people say this. Well, I know this one person. I know there are these 40 people over here that are having great. That's good. That's really good. But it's not meeting the larger cultural moment. That's not what the numbers are telling us. And so when I see things like the TLC, and when I see things like Estuary, those are the things that are going to meet those cultural moments. And the other thing that I would say, and again, this is not Ortho versus Protestant. This is not the argument I'm having. This is such a boring argument. If we have a conversation, like I'm going to fight to have us not go down that stupid road. That's not the comment I'm making. Because the statistics are showing up, is that there's this move back in towards the traditional. And notice I'm saying traditional and not conservative. There's a move back towards the traditional and the crunchiness. Paul even mentioned in the church plants that he saw move in those smaller church plants that are happening in Sacramento, and if they're getting some traction, they're actually making a move towards a more liturgical expression. And so as we see what's happening here, and that's why I think, and I'll go ahead, I'm sorry, I should have sent the link out. I'll get the link out. I think the conversation that that I've been trying to have, and I don't articulate it very well, but I experienced it in my own life. I found certain of those expressions, even though they were exciting in the moment and I went full into it, I found it wanting. I found it lacking the the depths that could, for me, being someone in recovery, withstanding the storms of life. And a lot of that's probably just on me, but I saw those sorts of things, so I personally experienced that. I think you hear a lot of people that are here for various reasons across the spectrums of faith, from so on and so forth. Is there's a reason why we're all here, and so when I'm noticing this shift back that I started to see a while ago, and now you're starting to see it really start to blossom, is for those of us, and a lot of us are Christian, like how do we respond back into that? Because it's real, it's happening, and I think we should know that as well as anybody else, because of what we're doing in this little corner, and what you are hungry for, what the people you see here, what they're hungry for. And I think it is moving into something that is much deeper than we've seen this Americanized, culturally captured church in America on both sides. All right, here's the link. Open it up. Let's see here. Let's go through some comments here while you guys are getting ready to jump in. Let's go here. All right, Anthony. There's a double-mindedness in millennials. They want church coffee shop, then they want the stained glass. Right. Isn't that true of all of us in some ways? I mean, to be honest, yeah, I think that's true. I think you could hear some folks talking about the authenticity piece or whatever. I might be skewed a little bit on this because I was part of a house church movement, which is an alternative movement. And so if people would be attracted into that, it's probably because they already saw what was going on out there and they did not want to jump in and participate in the other. So some of that could be skewed, but I did a lot of reading on that. And I think the larger thing you'll hear them say over and over, there were lots of papers. The millennials have been written about a lot. There were a lot of papers as people were trying to figure this out. And again, the late 2000s, early 2010s is on authenticity was very important to them. They would point to that thing, that you would say is, you guys call yourself Christians, but you certainly don't live like Christians. And you do this stuff on Sunday, but when I look at you, you guys are still just worried about money, and your kids getting the same education that all the secular kids are getting. Like, your life doesn't really look any different. Those are the sorts of things that would come out of those conversations for me. Maybe if Luke could jump in here, because he would describe himself as young, restless, and reform. I'd be curious, because I wasn't part of that sect. We've got some young, restless, and reformed out here. I'd like to see you guys jump in. I don't want to speak on something that's not really within my purview. Busy. Yeah, I think that's good. I want to really see each other seeing more of the image, right? I want to see you live it, see it expressed, see if it's real. Is it working in the lives of people? Here you go, Raziel. Lots of young people today are overwhelmed of all the information available and instead want to have more practical, hands-on, simple lives. I think there's a lot to that. I think there is. I think there is information overload. And I think a lot of the conversations we have around here is around being too propositional, that too much up in your head, too much about information. And a way to combat that is to, be embodied and to see practices, to think about some simple things that can get you out of your head and into the real world, and maybe move from here to here and all those sort of stuff you see there. I think that makes some sense. Here we go here. Here we got Mark Newbie Jackson is coming on the stage. Hey, Mark.
Hi.
Are you true? I haven't seen you before. Is this your first time jumping on?
It's my first time talking while jumping on. I had a rando with Paul a couple of months ago.
Very good. Awesome. What do you have to say, Mark?
Well, I know nothing about the church, but the 2008 global financial crisis, GFC. You remember that?
Yeah. Lived it.
It was like a 60-year straight line economic development, and then in 2008 it kind of dropped, and then kind of weekly carried on ups. And one finance guy calls it the silent depression, which is curious. Now, I've just been watching a video today entitled "Record Millions of Prime-Age Adults Giving Up on Ever Finding Work." And it goes into all the statistics on that. And he also talks about, from 2008, the number of drug addicts has gone up in a sharp line. So I think this church problem is not in isolation to these other problems that people
Absolutely.
pick up. So that's all I wanted to say, really. I know nothing about church, so.
Yeah, no, and I think, that's the case that Paul's making. I think it's very obvious by the numbers of the church, and again, like, I see this as a microcosm of the macrocosm of what's happening kind of in society, right? And the meaning crisis, which is kind of what this little corner and the folks over here, are around. And in so many ways, the church in the United States particularly has gotten consumed by the culture on both the left and the right? And it is failing to meet the meaning moment at scale. There certainly are success stories. There are wonderful pastors in wonderful churches and wonderful Christians who are moving and living at depth. That's not the argument I'm making, but at scale of what's happening. And I think it is that. I think that, and I think there, are some reasons why the churches hasn't been meeting that. My argument has been we've because of it's been consumed by the cultures. There's a thinness across a broad spectrum of the church. It's not meeting that moment, and it continues to try and go out in its therapeutic deas and all this other sort of stuff. It tries to take this cultural, this relevant, and tries to take that move out there and answer some of these deep questions, and it's not doing well for people. And that's why they're leaving in droves. I think I saw another statistic that yesterday that they were looking at people that they pulled a certain number of people, and they're like 600,000 who didn't want to work prior to COVID, and they pulled, the same number, like 3.1 post COVID, like don't want to have a job and don't want to work, and these are like people under 35. And that's fascinating, right? Like, because
That's the word.
now, yeah, and hey, man, I get this pushback against the quote unquote maybe extremes of Protestant work ethic or whatever. Like, I think you can go too far one way, but at the same time, like, part of what happened is, like, we were going to have to work the field with the sweat of our brow and the toil of our hands. There's something about work that's inherently good for the human soul and
I
understanding.
was going to say this.
Yeah.
Remember, embody. I think it's to do with embodiment and connection with body, connection with the land. Doing things with hands, I think, is quite important. The devil makes work for idle hands to do. And so if you don't have that, there's a disconnect.
Well, and more people. So this is I've been thinking about this. If you would, I'm old enough that you look at the overlay, the explosion of the cubicle, the explosion of the service economy job, right? The explosion of the city job versus where we were a lot more agricultural, manufacturing, and people are like, oh, that sounds awful. Actually, if you would talk to middle class people, and particularly, they love those jobs because, by the way, they did pay well, and there was a pension, and you could support a family. But there are people that literally, I know it's shocking for some people to hear. There are some people that actually like those factory jobs and working with their hands and those sorts of things. Like, in certain factories are probably better to work in than others. I'm not trying to say that, but so we're now in this this age of which, maybe it is more meaningless work, just sitting and pounding away on your computer or whatever, doing those sorts of things. I think they're, I think that's all part and parcel of, that's certainly one aspect of, I think, of the meaning.
Yeah, I like washing up, washing the dishes. You get this instant satisfaction of a job done. And I think that reward of having completed a task, it's not nothing.
Well, and I think coming back to this comment here, instead more practical, hands-on, simple lives. So when we talk about, when I would relate this back to more liturgical practices, right? Some of these more embodied practices, I think that goes part and parcel to what you were talking about there, right? There is something about incorporating your body in even what might seem like little simple things of even like the liturgical life, right? That thing, it's deep in us, right? And so I think moving out to where you're not just using this all the time, but it's becoming more embodied in certain liturgical practices.
Remember embodied.
Yeah, I think that does, those things actually help you, right, to connect in. I think there is I think tying those two together, and I've been saying there's this move back into a more traditional, and I don't want to say left or right, like a more traditional liturgical move, which is fascinating to watch in our times. I think that's part of that. So
I think that there's also this element where an identity which you are born with is something that is surmountable. It's something you can accept about yourself. But something which you choose is like insurmountable. And what I mean by that is like I have a friend where it's just so dramatically evident that he would be far happier if he was born with his parents telling him what his job would be. If his community chose his wife, if he was born in the religion that he would stay in for the rest of his life, right? But all of us are now choosing these things as opposed to just being born into them and having to accept them. Like, there's an aspect of I think everyone's maturity is, like, part of our maturity is accepting our bodies the way that they are, right? Now, consider the way that people are growing up now, where that's not, like, you don't even have to accept your own physicality, and everything is a possible choice. Everything about yourself, from what you do, who you marry, and all these things, like, we can say that these restrictions were terrible, but simultaneously, you didn't have to figure everything out. You could grow and accept these things how they were. And so now, if you're unhappy in a marriage, well, I guess I made the wrong choice, and I'll undo that, right? And the same thing with careers, the same thing with everything. And so it seems like there's no aspect of life which has to be dealt with because it's a decision, and maybe you just made the wrong one and you should choose a new one. And that's religious, but that's in everything else. Does this feel like it's connecting? Yeah. Yeah.
No, I was also thinking about locality with respect to that, right? Because when you grew up and most people stayed closer to their locality, Well, that locality dictated certain amounts of jobs that were available, right? Also, if you're part of a locality, um, divorce becomes much more difficult because everyone in the community knows you and you're going to divorce, and who else you're going to marry because you have the
Right,
locality, right? Like and there was also more people had vested interest in you because the families knew each other,
Right.
right? Like, so I think there is a lot of that. One of the things that I've been thinking about, which is really interesting, is, and I understand, like Paul mentions it, Sam Tiedemann mentions this comment too, and people would talk about, well, you need to stay in the tradition you're in or whatever, and like to make a shift, and let's just say you move from one form of Christianity to another, let's say, or whatever, that would be maybe a bad thing. However, actually, when Christ broke on the scene, all those people were leaving their pagan families. They might be doing a very different expression of what, we would just see Christ as the fulfillment of what the whole story from Genesis was. I know our Jewish brethren maybe have a little bit difference, but that's the way I would view it. But then that was very different too, right? So that's like, that was a radical life change. And so I see both sides of it, right? I think there's a real thing in the locality, but I also would push back on the people saying, well, you need to stay kind of where you're at. And I'm like, well, if that would have been the case, there wouldn't have been any Christians.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and that is true even within the group of the disciples. Like the disciples weren't in one tradition hoping to quote unquote just change like Pharisaical Judaism, because you have references to someone being a zealot, right? That would have been a different. Like there's references to multiple different groups, so Jesus is not starting a movement that's one thing just trying to stay within its tradition. It's trying to gather a variety of traditions.
Yeah. And I think you could see that. So one of the things when you had the whole, Hezi and Yosef, like the whole Judaizer thing, what they were trying to do is like, okay, hey, like if you're here, like if this is what you're doing, it's okay. Like you can still circumcised and you can follow the kosher. That's fine. Like stay, like that's okay. Like that's not breaking the rule. But if you're not, then that's okay. Then you don't need to be circumcised. And you don't have to worry about circumcision. It's like it was trying to find a way to say, hey, you can still honor your tradition in some ways, right? While allowing some other, there's some more freedom. One of the most amazing things, I shared it quite a bit there. Father Alaska, who just recently passed away in Alaska, he has this wonderful hour-long talk. He spent a lot of time talking about it. Was how Orthodoxy came to be in Alaska. And one of the really cool things that they did about this is they heard their natural origination stories, and then how they honored animals and the land and everything else. And they basically said, hey, you guys got all this stuff right. Like, yeah, that's good. You know what I mean? Like, keep doing that. Oh, do you want to hear the Paul Harvey? Do you want to hear the rest of the story? And then they gave them, and by the way, here's Christ. And it allowed them to just maintain fully within their traditions, and then also move into to understanding Christ and living out, that thing. So that was one of those wonderful things where it didn't try to colonize and change, or at that point Russianize Alaskans, and allowed the native Alaskans to live fully within what they knew to be true, but gave them that. And so I think you can see some of that playing out even in the, as you see, particularly in Acts, as the apostles and some of those other things that are going on.
I wonder if some of these choices have become now appear trivial, like they're not as big of a decision because more and more of these decisions can be made. And like the ability, like you were saying, to travel so far, Peterson won't shut up about how the automobile is like this major sign of freedom. And I would agree with that. You would have people traveling very far distances, but if they did, they took that absolutely seriously, right? If you're going to travel this distance, you're going to sit with your family and say, this might be the last time I ever see you. Now I get to leave and not feel like I left. So like the people from my hometown, we didn't have this heartfelt goodbye when I left for school. And then I just stopped coming back little by little by little by little. it was never big and dramatic. I never really took it seriously because it's, you know, it's a 3.5 hour drive. I'll see you guys soon, but I actually won't. And so the drama of the actual decision wasn't even made. It just kind of happened in the background while I wasn't paying attention. That distance is there. And I never even, like, I didn't feel like I was making that choice. Whereas before, if I chose to go to the big city, like, I would have had to have left my home and really say, I am out of here. I am gone. I love you guys. I'll never see you again.
So, David, are you saying we've lost our connection with death? Or I don't know how much of a connection with death our ancestors had, but
Yeah.
I think we have less.
Oh, absolutely. Our connection with death is pets. That's the, I really, really mean that.
I get it.
Yeah, the kind of connection that people used to have with death was so absolutely regular. And when you see how people deal with death, you are mostly seeing people shocked at the realization that it's still a thing. It's like, to most people, death is like tuberculosis. I thought we got rid of that, right? And even if you take things like infant mortality or the fact that the elderly are put in homes, like before, they would die and they died in your home, in your house, right, is where they died. And beyond that, when we had, when we had viewings, there wasn't a funeral home. It was your dining room table. People can't, like, so the experience with death was so regular. And I even think that chickens don't have heads in the grocery store is a problem. Is like,
they
my
do
wife
here in Georgia.
Okay, yeah, and they do. Let me tell you, they do in Chinatown. But my wife is someone who, like, doesn't want to be reminded that the chicken had bones. Like, I don't want to remember at all that it was an animal. So I want the meat. I don't want skin, and I don't want bones. Just give me the meat, and if at all possible, cut it into shapes where I don't have to think about any aspect of life, right? Whereas, like, you think of within the sacrificial system where people would eat it, like, you're literally seeing yourself, sometimes your sin, as being, the death of the animal being related to this thing and pouring out its life on the ground as part of what is supposed to happen. It, like, directly connecting you with death. And so you get people having these, like, I feel encountering death at a young age is also what made me encounter God, have an existential crisis when I was in, like, grade 5. But that's, like, a rare thing to occur for people. Like,
yeah, and that's a cultural thing here in the United States. And I'm not sure, Mark, for you, but I was watching a video over the weekend. Uzziah Trenum was talking about how his mom had died, and she died in their home, right? And then immediately, like, they take like, one of the things that, like, in Orthodoxy, which I found fascinating, is like, you bring the casket and you bring it into the church. And you're there, and then you do kind of services like you do for everything, and then they're there, and then you come back, and it's like the at least in America, immediately someone dies in an old home, but then we immediately take them to the funeral home, right? And we make them all up and try and make them look as good as possible, right? We have this whole, and it's $15,000 to try and bury someone nowadays, and it's just very disconnected versus like you said, the viewings used to happen in people's homes.
Yeah, and
we've been so disconnected from death because we don't want to think about it, so we whisk it away. We have this whole industry, so we can make it as easy as possible.
Well, I wonder about this connecting to the church growing when it is persecuted and shrinking when it isn't. Is that part of the church's function is an incorporation of death. And, like, I think it was the ethicist Margaret Somerville was talking about this idea. She spoke at my university, and I had a conversation with her. She was saying that one of the purposes of church was you gathered on a regular basis, and someone stood in front of you and said, "You're all going to die," like, and that this was actually one of the technologies, like the psychotechnologies of church, is that it introduced death in a bearable way. And so it's no longer serving this function. A lot of it is like, you know, motivational speaking and all this other stuff. It's not gathering on a regular basis and be like, you're going to die. You're going to die. Right. And that was part of Peterson's, like why people like Peterson so much.
Well, and I think it's saying it now, but I think actually so let's bring this back to what we're talking about. Something's missing. The church is collapsing, right? One of the things that, you know, I think Father Bear has mentioned, one of the things he talks about is like, and this is what Jordan Peterson would talk about too, is listen, we're called to die, like die now, die to ourselves, die to our selfishness, die to this consumeristic society, die to this culture in this world that is trying to lead you astray and everything else. Die to yourself in service of others, right? Instead of trying to find your secret sacred self, how Chad would say this is go out and find someone to help and go serve them, right? Find ways to pick up your cross. Now, we pick up our cross on a daily basis, like all the time. Like when you don't want to do something, but you die to yourself to take care of your family or to do something like the therapeutic deism and the rainbows and butterflies, Jesus is my boyfriend, that sort of stuff. Like, no, like the central message, like the central message, like what I love what JBP says is he's like, when he had that interview with the Catholics and he said when it all became guitars and hippies or whatever, he's like, no, the message of the Christ is to pick up your cross and follow me. Like that's the depth.
Have you heard of creds? Where so in religious studies, but like not theology, just studying different patterns, they use a term called creds. It's a acronym for something. I can't remember exactly what it is, but basically what they found is you would think that something that opens up to bringing in as many people as possible, and okay, people aren't showing up to church, let's make it easier. They actually find that people show up less. And the stricter you make things, the harder you make things, the more likely people are to be committed, right? Mm-hmm. And so you could identify the West as almost inherently lacking in cred. Oh, someone found it. Credibility enhancing display. Oh, Mark, you found it. Credibility enhancing displays, creds. So it might be something like, I grew up Catholic and we actually gave up something for Lent. Whereas if you go to a church now, they'll be like, well, you don't have to give something up. You could take something on. Like maybe you read for the month of Lent or something like, and it's just like, guys, make this hard. Make this as hard as possible. And yes, you'll lose people, without a doubt you will, but you lose what Tim Keller sometimes called the mushy middle, right? You lose those people, but you, like the increase in people's interest, you make it hard, you make it difficult, you make it exclude people, and then people fight each other to become a part of it.
Well, Christ didn't. The thing that you'll notice is, like, I'm just always reminded, like, when the crowd would come, he'd generally give a hard teaching, you know. And I'm reminded, like, this was the thing I actually taught about when I was at Capernaum with my seminary class. We finished up our Old Testament in Israel. Is right after he's fed the 5,000, they follow him. He goes over to Capernaum, and they follow him there. And they're like, "Hey, dude, we want some more of that bread, man." And he's like, "If you only know what I can give you," he's like, you know. But then he says, "Unless you eat of my flesh and drink my blood," you know. And they're like, "Say what, dude? We just want some of that bread you had over there." And then the disciples, which were more than 12, and more people following, and they're like, "Okay, great, the crowd's gone. You didn't really mean that, did you, Jesus?" And he's like, "No, like unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood." And a lot of them were like, "That's crazy." And a good chunk of them left, right?
Right.
The call is, and this is why Jordan Peterson has resonated so well with people, is the true Christian call is to pick up your cross, right? And follow me. And it's going to be hard, right? And it's going to cost you everything in a way. But on the flip side, it's that thing that's going to allow you to withstand the storms of life. It's that thing that's going to give you the peace that goes beyond human understanding. The self-sacrificing love towards other is the actual way to become a real human being, right? That's how you become.
I'm wondering, just as we're kind of hovering on these ideas, And Mark, I think your introduction to the notion of death is very, very important, because if creds creates, like, if these costly acts create greater religious involvement, and we are living in utter prosperity in times that like no one has ever known, then we are living in a period of time where we would be systemically lacking in credibility religiously. We could describe this prosperity as an utter threat to the ability for people to see credibility within the religious traditions, and would require, like, we need to take on artificial restrictions considerably more to show what these things are actually worth.
And so this is McMo. Thanks for putting this. This is McMo's central argument, which I get it. This is part of it, yes, McMo, but when it's all easy burden and light yokes and you don't give any steep slope, we've proven in America the church is collapsing. That's not working. And so with the whole something's missing, the meaning crisis, and the collapsing church in America, McMo, I would challenge you very deeply on this, that I think we have a lot of easy burdens and light yokes. That's what we've been trying. And people are leaving in droves. And they're becoming,
I would include on this the idea that when we're talking about light yokes and everything, there was a period of time where all of the hymns spoke of rest, because everyone worked back-breaking labor. There's I am okay with the idea of actually working in heaven, right? Because I find so much enjoyment, right? Creating art and all these other things. And the reason why rest at certain points is overemphasized is because life is such a slog, right? I don't need to be, like, sometimes they speak of finding pleasure in life through religion, but that's also because life was not enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like life isn't easy, man. Like a lot of things you'll talk about, a lot of the people that go through the faith crises is when you hit that thing, a spouse dies, a child dies. Like, you have these massive things that go on. And, unless you've wrestled ahead of time with some of with just the difficulties and understanding it's going to be difficult, and going down to the depths. Now, the beautiful thing is we're all on our pathways, right? And we are seeking, and we're living this life, and we're hoping to learn as we go along. All of these things, I think are shaping us to where we ultimately come out. And if we're honest, and open seekers, I think we'll find our way. But, we've tried now this novel idea that we've tried in the past 40 to 50 years of the church in the United States, which has been in many ways a very watered down version of things, as the culture, as Paul had talked about, has consumed it. I think we're seeing that people are telling us, they're telling us by leaving, they're telling us in their stories of deconstruction, right? Not getting things to, not being down into the depths, not the embodied stuff. And finally, we have a formerly young, restless, and reformed back in here. Some of those questions were around that. So when I started this out, and I think the thing I love about Paul is he's zooming out. He's actually seeing both sides of the coin here. I think all this is coming together, and I think it's why people are coming into the TLC. Listen, I got mad respect. If you're willing to watch 80 hours of John Vervaeke videos, dude, like that's like taking on, that's a heroic journey. If you can sit through a 2.5 hour Paul Vanderklay video on something, like, that's not easy.
So, hey guys, what I don't know. There's a lot of things to the conversation. What I would say is that people are desiring the real, however you want to understand that and define it. And there's going to be tons of debate about what that is. but I think it's something that we all know in the deepest sense of ourselves. And it's that, because that's the steep slope thing, is we all intuitively know that life and death are related, and that life and meaningfulness and value and worth requires sacrifice. That's the chickens with the heads in the supermarket. You have to acknowledge that require, it's not pushing death off to the perimeter. It's picking up the biggest rock you can carry and carrying it uphill. That's why everybody loves, or people love Rogan, Goggins, all these people that are telling you to do hard things, watching tons of the Meaning Crisis videos. But then there's all sorts of people. In my mind, I think, well, is this a sample bias? Are we just focusing on a narrow subset of people that didn't have meaning for whatever reason, and so then they're reaching out for something harder and more difficult? Because then the error, it's kind of walking that fine line between error on this side and error on this side, and the narrow gate is you can get into this kind of hyper. There was some comment about legalism or pietism, or the gospel of just try harder, and like steep slope, let's go to an Orthodox service and attend every service and fast 100%. And I think you need this is where traditional religion and institutional religion, or however you want to call it, was valuable, is that I think you got a shaker in the background. But it was valuable because it allowed for application and participation at all these different levels. Because I think about that with the church we're at now, the church that shall not be named, but it's like, it's kind of the way I illustrate is I had a conversation with my priest once, and we were talking about the rich young ruler, and I think it's a valuable insight, or I found it to be very valuable, that he said, when the rich young ruler came to Jesus, he said, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said, "Well, you know the rules, and he's like, "I've done these since my youth." And he said, "Great, cool, you're good." But then the rich young ruler, personally, within himself, there was something he still lacked. He was a steep slope. He's like, "What? Okay, this isn't enough. This isn't working. Like, I need something else." And so Jesus is like, "All right, I'll give you the level up, sell everything you have and give it to the poor." Now, I think the problem is you can often take that and you can apply it universally to everyone. It's everyone's called to sell all you have and give it to the poor, which I don't think is what Jesus was saying.
Right.
Like, it's what the rich young ruler needed to do. But he knew that in here, like his own sacred magic knew that that's what he needed. Is that the call to everyone? No. And that's what I like about the church that we're at now, is I don't know. My priest is, I think, proper and cool enough where he's not overly browbeating and hyper legalistic and Bible thumping, or whatever you want to call it. He allows you to go as deep and as hard as you want to go.
I hate a little bit of this, so
Okay.
I'm having a reaction, and I'm wondering what you think about this.
Okay.
I hate that we only talk about that every time I have ever heard anyone talk about that in the last 20 years. They have always placed the exception clause of, "I'm not saying that's for you." Like, this to me is this whole thing is that I understand that these extremes are not necessary for everyone, but these extremes must be necessary for someone. And I don't know anyone who has sold everything and gave it to the poor. Okay? Is that, like, to me, every single time I've ever heard anyone talk about the love of money, they always want to make sure that they say, "Look, it's the love of money that's the root of all evil, not money. Money isn't and I'm like, the only reason why you're telling me that it's not money that's the root of all evil, but the love of money that's the root of all evil, is because you love money, and we all love money." That's right. Is like, how, like, I want to meet people who are crazy and do extreme things, and that is so remarkably rare, right? Like, that's what I want, and I feel like we always put these caveats to make it easier. And I understand for some people it was difficult or whatever, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. Like, again, nothing's all or nothing. It's either or. Like, there are certain points, like in recovery, right? Meeting that person where they're at. There are some people that are so beat down. I mean, they are so beat down that they need a gentle hand up and a lot of encouragement just to try and get out of that pit that they're in. They need a really soft touch, right? That's what that person needs. Other times there are people, their ego is so inflated, right? And they're so out of control that they need a kick in the butt. What's amazing when you're in those meetings is there's a wisdom in who you talk about, old timers or whatever. And there's this sense of when people are sharing, and the mood of the meeting will match, right? Like you can tell when someone's talking vulnerably from their heart of really deep, difficult things. It'll be amazing the sort of shares that people have and the things they share. And virtually every single time the person that needs a kick in the butt and their ego popped, because if they don't, they're going to go out and drink and die, or that person who needs that gentle hand up. Like and I think that what Luke talked about is like everything depends on the person. And I also think everything depends on the moment, right? Where you're at, where you're standing in this moment. There are times that I need a kick in the butt, and there are times I need someone to come in and give me the gentle hand up, right? And so,
But
you know,
do we
becomes
think
very,
that people are too disciplined now? Like when we're encountering Christians, do we feel that they're too rigid and too disciplined?
Probably
that
the people that are talking about discipline all the time are.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, is like, I think we need interruptions. Like when I go to church, I try not to pay attention to the parts I already agree with, right? Like when scripture is being read, I try to listen to the things where I go, oh, I forgot about that bit. Right.
and I think sometimes this plays out. Probably the person who's kicking back the most against discipline is the person who needs to get discipline in their life, right? Probably the person that is kicking back the most about people not being disciplined, that person needs to have a little softer heart. So, you know, if you would look at those things when you think about like that own personal transformation, it's there. I wrote this thing when I was evangelical pastor guy, Ask, Seek, Knock, and I shared this with my house church, and I was trying to call people deeper into the life, right? It's like one of the things I wrote here. The question is at hand: are we willing to do what it takes to get the answers we seek and the promises of Jesus? To borrow a line from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it is simple but not easy. But we all know from our own experiences that the easy things in life are fleeting and never give us what we truly want. Yet the things we have worked for and found the discipline to develop are the things that truly bring meaning and purpose to our life. Everyone can do easy. The measure of a true man or woman is doing what is hard in order to transform their lives. That's Lance at his peak evangelical thing. And then I went down to talk about where we were talking about this, how do we seek, we do the things, and it's like, but don't just listen to God's word, you must do what it says. So why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord when you don't do what I say? And then I go in and, you know, make the case. It's like we want to buck hard against obedience. We really buck hard. We hate obedience in this culture. But if you spend any time reading what Jesus's words are, like even the Great Commission is teaching them to obey, right? Like there's this sense of he has these things for us. And yeah, they're the highest, hardest things, prayer for our enemy and all this other sort of stuff. But if you want to be a transformer, you want to be a real human being, that's what it looks like. And it's not easy. Like dying to yourself and self-sacrifice to others, it's not easy. But that is the thing that is going to transform you and help you to become a real human being. And so if people want to push back against those things, they can, and it doesn't mean they're not saved, and it doesn't mean any of that stuff. But what do you want out of your life? What do you want to be? You can do easy all you want. You know, you can do easy all you want, but if you want to be transformed, I'm going to tell you, you can go in and half-ass 12-step recovery. You can do that. Good luck.
I want to try to clarify what I'm saying, because I think I think we agree underneath the tension or whatever. The way I'd illustrate it is this: 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. Now, that's a verse that people throw around a lot in a platitude kind of way. But I think the truth of what that's saying is that now what's funny is I think what people push back on that verse because we often feel like we're being tempted beyond what we can bear. I mean, I think people feel that all the time. Like, this is too much. I was just feeling that. I was just saying that to my wife last night because I cut off the end of my finger while I was making coleslaw. I don't bad technique, I guess, but I was just sitting there chopping, and all of a sudden I was just like,
It wasn't even for a worthwhile food.
Was it good coleslaw, though, Luke?
I mean, yeah, it was all right. It wasn't, I do it all. There's a lot of things that I cook just based off of feel and technique. I just,
Mayo or
intuition,
vinegar?
art. Huh?
Mayo or vinegar? What
A
kind of
little
slaw are we
both. A little of both. A little lemon juice, mayo, some sour cream. Anyhow, so I was just thinking, because there have been a number of things recently in the life where I try to practice what I preach, and I say, you know, everything is a gift if received as a gift. And I was just saying to my son the other day, God, I really believe this. God is always speaking. It's fundamental to my ontology. That's what this is. What we're experiencing is God speaking. And so when God is speaking, listen. I try to listen. Like, what are you saying to me? What am I needing to learn from this situation? What's going on? So God's always teaching you. And what I was saying to my wife last night is I was like, God, can you listen? Enough with the lessons for now. Okay. I've had enough lessons for this week. I think I'm good. So I'm feeling like God is, tempting me.
I prayed that prayer, Luke. I'm like, God, I've got more than I can handle, bro. Come on.
Right.
You trust me too much.
Yeah. I feel like I'm good at this point, and I think what I'm trying to get at with the gospel of just try harder or discipline, or should we try harder? My yoke is easy and my burden is light. And that antinomy between those two things is that what I'm trying to say is, like, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, because transformation is internal. This is my dichotomy of the inside and the outside, and that God is always true. Transformation is the God within. It's not going to come from some forced, coerced outside thing. So you can sit there and browbeat people all day. You should be more disciplined. You should try harder. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. If they're not ready to do it in a synergistic way, in a voluntary way, it's not going to do anyone any good. It's like how to win friends. It's spiritual, how to win friends and influence people. It doesn't matter if they should be more disciplined. If they're not ready to do it, you can tell them till you're blue in the face. You can lead a horse to water.
And I made that point. So again, and that thing where I call is what I'm talking about is personal. It's about your personal transformation. Like, it's not to just try harder to learn my salvation. It's not to just try harder to earn status in the church. It's not to just try harder because I have to do all these things. No, it's about you do the things, you work the steps, you do the practices, you do the difficult things, because for you and your journey, it's about your personal transfer. It's about being you being transformed to be like Christ, right? Like, it is very much, this is your whole personalist thing, Luke, right? And none of us are going to be perfect in this. I'm not saying that, but again, I think something's missing. Like, that's why we're here. Like, that's the meaning crisis. That's the TLC. That's what had you young, restless, and reformed on the journey you're on. Jess is on his journey. David, Mark. Well, why are we here? Like, something's missing. That culture is not getting right for us, whether you're on the right or the left. Let's just say it's not working for anyone. And I think that's something missing, and why JBP resonated so deeply with people. It is a call to more, not because of outside forces. It's why, like, Jesus didn't give us all these hard things because he needs us to do them. It's because it's what's best for us.
Somebody boot this person. How do I boot this person? Someone with a wrench, mute them. Put them on an infinite timeout. I'm just kidding. Jess,
what's up, Luke?
Wisdom, you black and white beauty.
I don't have any wisdom. I was just coming to say hey.
Oh, hey.
I hadn't really been following the conversation.
It's about the balance and the tension between discipline, working out your righteousness with fear and trembling, filling up what's lacking in Christ's afflictions, grace and works, and then just like how much of that can be externally imposed. Because versus just voluntarily accepted, because we live in a, I mean, it's true. We live in a, I think a lot of David's point is we live in a affluent, what's the term that's thrown around a lot in here, in the corner, like a affluent, oh,
Affluenza.
there is affluenza, but it talks about like when civilizations are on the verge of collapse, there's a term that people use to describe them. I mean, we're not largely in a culture. I mean, this is a struggle with my kids a little bit, you know, like I don't, the desire to do hard things is not innately wired in most people. You know, it's not like we're not really in a culture that's telling you to do hard things. I mean, unless you probably grow up in a conservative Protestant family that's trying to really enact those kinds of things, or Catholic or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has to do with comfort, doesn't it? Like,
Well, a lot of that, yeah.
because if you have like a space where you can just be comfortable, that's where you want to be. Like some people don't have a place they can just be comfortable, so they have to go out and be disciplined and do the hard things, or maybe not. Maybe they just there's escapism in other ways, but I always find the battles with comfort, something like that.
I think this Mandy's comment, and I think you shared, Luke, I think it's really good. And I think, again, everything's a fine line. Like, it's the spiritual discipline stuff is so filled with self-righteousness. I was crushed and found I have nothing to prove, nothing I could prove. Freedom, goodness grows without my grasping it. To me, it's the paradox that we live in between, which it is like, my burden is easy, my yoke is light, and it is pick up your cross and follow me, like trying to find your way into that paradox. And we have all lived within frames where people have used spiritual disciplines in a self-righteous way. But just because other people have imposed that stuff in that way doesn't mean that the things that Jesus has talked to us about doing, like fasting and prayer and all those other things, those aren't bad. Like, you can't run all the way to the other side, because ultimately those stuff lead to freedom and stuff. And the other thing we find which is anybody who's lived any life would understand this, is that actually developing discipline in your life gives you more freedom. It seems counterintuitive, but discipline in your life. And so one of the things I struggle with being a IPP is organization, and some of those things become difficult for me. In certain frameworks like athletics, or you put me in a class and I'm competing for a grade, like there are certain things I can do that drive me for certain things. But developing daily disciplines in my life are very difficult. And it has had ramifications in my life. Whenever I find time to actually work on certain disciplines, I find that my life goes better. And what I mean by that is how I relate to the world, how I relate to my family, how my relationships, those sorts of things. And so I agree, Mandy, like people who are using this as some sort of thing here, just because some people have taken it to the wrong direction, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do those things or try to develop discipline.
I think I'm trying to figure something out within myself. And so please take this as one aspect of me and not all of me. Is that I feel like what we naturally have sensitivity towards is what we're weak at, not what we're strong at. So we as people who are remarkably undisciplined are constantly feeling like, oh, Christian purity culture was so difficult and all this other stuff. It's like, I know people where they're basically essentially, I don't even know what the complaint was. I don't want to raise my child in Christian purity culture because, you know, I wasn't allowed to make a whole bunch of mistakes. Like, that's how it sometimes feels. It feels like we're utterly undisciplined, and so we're emphasizing the aspects that are, oh, it's not a requirement, and this was so hard on me, and everything else. I don't know how I'm supposed to understand it, because when I talk to people about this kind of stuff, it's difficult to find people who have fasted for 3 days straight unless they were into keto. Like, people who work out, who are into CrossFit, are more into monasticism than the traditional Catholics are. I'm sorry. Like, it feels kind of weird that we're having these conversations where it's just like, yeah, we're complaining about exactly the things we shouldn't be. It's like that's where our sensitivities are, not where our strengths are. And I'm trying to figure this out right now. I'm sorry if I'm seeming like an asshole. I just need the asshole voice to be the part that pumps up and be like the people who want to include all the other spiritual. I'm going to be quiet for a second. I think I need to listen. But there's these sensitivities within me where I think it might be connected, Luke, with this idea of the mote in your own eye, the speck in your own eye. That in some situations, there's things that attract our attention, and they attract our attention because they're so personal. And so we're talking about the things that we suck at, and saying, well, we don't even need to be good at those things. Who cares? I have to shut up for a bit. Let me listen to you guys talk about that.
Well,
I
and
think
I think
I appreciate what you're doing. I think it's good.
Well, and I think so. To come back to what started this and Paul's thing, like the something's missing, the meaning crisis, right? The collapse in like these things are real things. We're seeing this phenomena happen, and the data's proving it. We're hearing the stories and so on and so forth. And kind of the cultural moment that we're in. Mark brought up this really interesting thing at the very beginning. He was kind of layering this on. Like there's this massive move where particularly people under 35, like they don't want to work at all. Like they don't even want to have jobs, and think about how that plays out for them individually, like as individually, how that plays out in society. Like there's this amazing pushback against, some of these things that almost a pushback against hard work. And one of the things I do want to say, like, I'm not discounting in any way some of the, I'm searching for words, forgive me, but fundamentalist, works-based, you got to do this and you got to do that and everything else or whatever. Like I refute that too. Like, no, that's not it. Right. But just because that's wrong, it doesn't mean that we don't share the crunchy bits of what life, because life is going to be hard, right? And you're going to have to tackle and do hard things. Like if you're not preparing your children that life is going to be hard, what are you preparing them?
Well, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that, I mean, I believe you have to do everything. Like I've said before, I think nobody gets away with anything. Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, you're screwed. I think all that's true. I just don't think you can force it. Either you yourself or externally, it's got to happen naturally and emerge. It's got to be a gardener, or it's not like I often lament with my kids, patterns that I see in their life. And then I want to browbeat them and yell at them and talk to them about it. But that's just bad parenting. It's just like the reason they're doing that, not completely, but a lot of it is a bad cultivation. Like the way I want to try to illustrate it is, I was speaking with my wife the other day about, we often are talking just endlessly about our kids and our family and fixing problems. And the reality is that talking about it is probably not how you fix it, but whatever. That's one of the blindness of my cultural milieu that I'm swimming in. And it's hard to not. But we were talking about, like my wife was talking, my wife had a really great childhood in a lot of ways. I mean, it was almost like idyllic Pleasantville, which doesn't mean it wasn't without difficulty, but her parents were just very stable. They were married young. They're still together. It's kind of farmers, and so they didn't really talk about a lot of their problems, which has its own problems. But a lot of it is that all of that stuff was just, some of it's repressed. Yes, that's a negative side, but a lot of it just wasn't in your face trauma all the time. And she was just talking about how her parents, whatever their own internal struggles were and what they were dealing with, they never just dumped that on their kids in negative ways, their own neuroses and things. And we were talking about our tendency to do that sometimes, our frustration and hyper talking to our kids about these things. And part of that is just, I guess what I'm trying to say within all of that is that I'm viewing this within fostering, gardening, cultivation, because I think that's the proper frame and way to understand person making is that it has to happen organically. Like, it just has to happen symbiotically. These things have to grow up voluntarily. And so, like, kind of back to what I was saying, you could look externally, and this is even the mote in your eye and the log in somebody else's eye. You could see all these problems in someone else outside and focus on them and tell them about them a ton. I just don't know how useful that is. I don't know how much utility there is in doing that. It's not debatable. This is the undebatable thing. You must be holy as I am holy. Nobody gets away with anything. You can't sweep things under the rug. That's true for me. It's true for other people. I think that also. But then how do you get there? I don't think you get there by telling each other constantly the things that we need to do. Because I think we all know those things.
Yeah.
You know?
I think Mandy, I think, makes a really good point here. Maybe spiritual discipline isn't reading Bible more than neighbor, going to church more, but helping them, serving at a children's hospital, painting the windows, adoption, where's Tellus Love. I think that's really good. One of the things that I pointed out, like to my wife, is the latest North American Orthodox saint is Matushka Olga, and she was a priest's wife, a Native Alaskan, and what she did was love her family, her communities, and the surrounding communities extremely well. And she was not learned, and she wasn't given a whole bunch of advantages in life or anything else, but she loved so well where she was at, and now she's a saint. And so I do think that, I think those are what you're talking about there, Mandy. I think those are ascetical practices. I think that's living the life. That's doing the things, you know? I love McMo. Which of your fathers would give your kids a snake? I totally agree, but McMo, what I'm reminded of is, and Jess knows probably where I'm going with this, when the Israelites were mumbling and grumbling out in the wilderness or whatever, and he sent the snakes, and they were like, hey, dude, like, Moses, go talk to your boy here, like, he can get rid of these snakes. And God says, hey, take this bronze serpent, rise it up on a pole. If they look at it, they'll be healed. He didn't remove the snakes, and the snakes were biting and killing the children too. And then God didn't get rid of the snakes. He told them, tell them to go look up at this bronze serpent raised up on the pole, and they'll be healed. So again, it's a both and there, my man.
That's the God of the Old Testament, Lance, which we all know is an evil, different God. Cover your ears, Peggy. David, no, I want to know when you, and not to rush you.
Yeah.
You're getting at something legitimate, I think, and this is my general take with anybody who's good faith, and I think you're a good faith person, even if we don't know how to say it yet.
Yeah.
Whatever you're feeling in you, that's a pushback, is real.
Yeah.
And I think we just need to, again, even here, we got to cultivate that, bring it to light, because that's the tension that's gonna make this true dialogos.
I think that there's, and this is part of the changing in denominations that I see people doing, is that there's also a search for a kind of consistency. And I feel like there were aspects, for instance, for a lot of evangelicals, of Reformed theology that they had not integrated. And so I think one of the reasons why there was a Young, Restless, and Reformed movement is because there became a popularization of knowing things that were not integrated, and people did not know how to integrate those things without becoming parts of those movements. Because I witnessed those movements. I enjoyed some of that preaching.
Yeah.
But I had already integrated those things, so I never became part of any of those movements.
That's interesting.
I had already integrated it. And I see the Orthodox Church being something that the Western Church has not integrated at all. And so there may be as Paul talks about in the future, there might be some pushback, right? Where there may be a middle ground that is met within evangelical circles, because there was something of orthodoxy that has not been integrated and needs to be integrated. I do think that that's something which is separate from it. There was a movement around the same time as the Young, Restless, and Reform, and it kind of, like, it was more of a movement that I was a part of, which was the new monasticism. A lot of people are asking in the chat about, like, do I know about Mount Athos? Do I know about do I know about these movements? And monasticism was something, like I jokingly say, like I was punk rock when I was younger, and then I got into monk rock, where like when I was in Bible college, I grew my hair, I would randomly shave it, like I would do all these like things that were monastic things. I got involved in Messianic Christianity, and I didn't eat anything that was biblically unkosher for like a decade. Like these are things that are interesting to me as like pushing what our limits are, but these things are, I think, not fully integrated. And because they're not fully integrated, it's also why it's difficult to verbalize them, because it's so difficult to talk about the thing that we're not talking about. We just find ourselves looping again and again these issues that we know how to talk about. And so, and Lance, this is not meant as any kind of an insult. I hate the word authenticity because it's a word that we know, and so we keep on using it. And it's just like, no, what we need is and this is the hardest thing, what we need is the thing that we don't know that we need.
Hell yeah.
But so then what the hell word are we going to use?
And the reason I use that word, so when I brought that up, that was the word the millennials were using, right? And I know that a lot of people really don't like the authenticity word. I've realized that around here. So when I talk about and Paul's doing this whole authenticity, sincerity, and profilicity thing now. He's doing this whole mapping thing on a lot of videos. And so
which is what literally means, right? Literally.
Yeah.
Authentically.
So that was the word I was hearing. Like if you look at the late 2000s, early 2010s, that was the word that millennials were using. Now, again, I think probably around here, people would say, what do they mean by that word, right? And, you got to define it and all this other sort of stuff. So, yeah, I don't spend a lot of time personally. Like, I don't feel any pushback with that. Like, I totally get what you're saying with it. Like, you're trying to figure out what's at the core of that. And so when I use it, I'm using it more about, it's not I'll be honest with you. I'm not really mapping onto, I've watched quite a bit of it, Paul's authenticity, sincerity. I get it. I kind of get it, but it hasn't really clicked for me. Maybe Sam understands it better and he can explain it, but I haven't really mapped onto that authenticity, sincerity, and profilicity thing. But I think some of it is when Paul, like I have a blind spot for left thinking. I think Paul sometimes when he ascribes I think he does a much better job than many, but when he ascribes certain things to why I, as a conservative person or whatever, I'd be like, yeah, me and my friends, we don't think that.
All right, I will define it for you, Lance.
Ooh.
Okay, so authenticity, sincerity is easier to define. I'll start there. Sincerity is where your identity is given to you from above, basically from the culture and your context and stuff like that. And you and then therefore doing a good job is like sincerely living into the identity that was given to you and the expectations put on you, and doing that with a sincere heart. Authenticity is the idea that no, we can't have identity coming on us from above. Identity comes on us from within, and therefore when I'm being authentic, I'm rejecting whatever this pseudo-sincere outside identity is trying to impose on me, and I'm finding my real identity from within me, and I'm, manifesting that. And then like profilicity is sort of like this weird new digital social media kind of thing where we construct like a fake identity through these sort of electronic means and kind of try and we're like the Wizard of Oz inside the machine of our online identity or something like that. That one is honestly the term that I still don't feel like I get quite as well.
So that makes me feel like the sincerity authenticity thing to me is still just divided man stuff. You're living in a split world. I mean, to me, like there is no above and
says
below.
The profile of Luke.
Well, I mean, I say that at church too, or my house.
Paul, am I reading right? Thanks, Sam, for being my Paul interpreter here. He's got the interpretation of the Paul's tongues down. But I think Paul would say that we're not all always one thing or the other. Like you have some of those things battling at once, and I think that we get to that divided man thing you're talking about there, right? But he's seeing certain camps tend to be more this than that, and I think that probably I can map onto that concept.
Basically, every Bollywood movie, like I love Bollywood movies. Some of them are actually pretty terrible. Most Bollywood movies are terrible. Some Bollywood movies are great. But basically, the plot of every good Bollywood movie is that India is a super strong sincerity culture where your identity is given to you by life and circumstance and fate, and including who you're supposed to love and get married to. And then there's this new kind of Western idea of authenticity creeping in. And it's like the plot is this intention between the desire to be sincere and the desire to be authentic. And then the authentic self wins. And then like the father finally accepts your authentic self as opposed to trying to impose your sincere identity on you.
Within reason. It's not, he doesn't have to accept that the kid's a cannibal.
Right. Well, yeah, normally the daughter is just falling in love with the person that she actually loves instead of who the father wanted her to marry, or you know, something like that. Or the son who's supposed to take over his family business turns out he actually wants to be a folk singer, or something like that.
Well, I think I was about to talk about fathers because I think a lot of this is like spiritual fathers. Lance gave me this book about spiritual fatherhood and how it's important that sort of this, you know, we're talking about spiritual disciplines and like whether to go hard or like ease up or like all that stuff. Like there's no like system to decide whether you need to be more disciplined or not. And so you need to, and you, like, I think it was Luke, you said like, you can't see what you can't see. Like you don't know what you don't know. And so that's why you have a father, a spiritual father, or at least like a friend you could talk about these things with that would be honest with you.
Sponsor, a disciple leader.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And so like it becomes deeply personal. You go to this person and you say, hey, here's the thing I'm struggling with. And they can be like, hey, I think you should buckle down for a bit and maybe do some fasting or be more disciplined in your work or whatever it is. Or maybe they'll just be like, hey, take it easy on yourself. You know, you're going pretty hard on yourself. Why don't you just like not let those thoughts kind of be so intrusive? So that's the benefit of like, I don't know how to systematize that I don't think you can. And so it's a personal thing because the teachings are both grace and, you know, or faith and works, let's say. So you got to have faith and you got to have it express itself. And sometimes you can go too hard into one or the other. And, you know, with the Bollywood example of the father finally sort of doing this accepting, maybe I'll tell a quick story. I work in video production and so like, that's what I do all the time. And my older son, I think when he was a sophomore, he took a video production class and kind of thinking, you know, he was kind of like, hey, I'm taking a video production class. I was like, oh, that's fun. That's cool. I'm glad you're taking that. The video production class ended up not being much about kind of like the video production I do. It had to do with like, sort of like, I think the teacher had some like TV station experience. So a lot of times like the TV reporter will go out with the camera, they'll set up the camera on the tripod, then they'll go on camera and they'll do their report. You know, a lot of these reporters on the scene, it's literally just the reporter and their camera on a tripod. Sometimes they'll have a photographer travel with them. But so anyway, she was like, okay, kids, you pick a topic and then you film something, but you're going to be on camera speaking. And my son was just like, I don't want to learn that. So it wasn't really about video production. It was about like, it was this news kind of production. And he wasn't interested in that. He wanted to like edit things or like put things together or whatever. So he had like an F in the class. And I was like, dude, we gotta fix this. Like, you can't fail this class. And he would just basically refuse. He doesn't want to be on camera, super shy, super just like, doesn't want to be on camera. So he refused. And there was a point I was just like, hey, you know, if you're going to fail this class. He's like, I know. And I was like, you shouldn't fail this class. He's like, I know. But he just wasn't going to do it. And there was a point I was like, okay, I'm not going to hound him about it anymore. Because there was like 2 weeks where I was like on him. And eventually it just came to the point where I'm just like, okay, that's his choice. He doesn't have to do video production like this. It doesn't have to, you know, get his grade up. I'll just let him sort of fail the class. And well, I tell that story. That's sort of a story of me accepting my son is sort of just making this decision. I don't know if it was a good decision or not, but it was a decision that he got to make, and it was clear that he made it, which I think was good for him. But, you know, it's just one of those complicated life things. And so, you know, that's also part of the thing is you got to have a relationship with the father. The father can't just be this, you know, systematized thing. You do this. If you're not doing this, then do this. If you're not doing that,
Yeah.
you know, like you like, that's why you return to the priest or whatever, or your pastor, and you say, hey, I did this stuff. It's not working. It's actually making stuff worse. And he'll be like, all right, maybe we'll try something different. That's a little crazy. So anyway.
I think that's really good. And I think that brings home, which again, like in Protestantism, people talk about disciple leaders, right? Like that's a big thing. If you're every whether Methodist church or non-denom or seeker, you know, everybody wanted you to be in that sort of a relationship. I think that's where 12-step programs get it really right in sponsorship, right? It's that person who sees those blind spots out of you, but hopefully you pick someone, you know, that they're for you, right, Jess? Like, okay, I know this person loves me. I know they love me. They want what's best for me.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but because of that, they're actually willing to, at times, like, I can tell you how many times I've gone to a sponsor or a spiritual father, and I got the exact thing is like, dude, Lance, you're killing yourself. Okay. Just give yourself a break, you know? And then I've also, equally a number of times, it's like, I needed a kick in the butt. And like, I have this big blind spot. And they're like, hey, you know what, Lance? The problem isn't with your wife right now. Why don't you, you know, don't do this thing? And why don't you shut up and keep your eyes on your own paper? And why don't you, you know, so you have to have that. And ultimately, if you've got that person who loves you and cares for you and, you know, is ultimately for you, you can trust that they're going to be willing to tell you the truth. They're going to be willing to tell you the truth. Now, the beautiful thing about those relationships are, all those relationships I've been in, it's suggestive only. They're not, you know, if I don't do that, it's not like they're not going to be my friend anymore or whatever. It's like, okay, you can do it. You know, hey, just here's my suggestion. You know, to do it, take with it what you do with it, what you want or whatever. But I think that's a really important aspect of that.
Yeah,
and I think some of that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I think a lot of times when we have like a bad experience with that kind of relationship, it's usually someone that's overly systematized. They're just like, you know, you come in with a problem and they're like, hey, why don't you pray more? And you're just like, that's the solution? You're going to tell me? They're just like, yeah, just pray more. And you can tell it's coming out of a mindset of sort of this mechanical worldview that like, oh, if you just pray more, you'll fix this problem in your life. And there's no real relationship. They're just sort of going through a systematized thing with you without engaging in a relationship with you. And you know, you see that when people get kind of booted out of churches or whatever. They're just like, all right, here's the rules, and then you've gone too far, and now here you go. Good luck. And so, yeah.
Did you guys read the article about demons that Paul talked about this morning?
I was just listening to him talk about it. Yeah,
it's wild.
What's the summary?
So the summary is that there's this new therapy method or school of thought or practice called internal family systems, and I had heard Vervaeke and Jordan Hall.
A snake. Picture
right.
it as a snake.
I had heard Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke talk about that. Was my first exposure to this, and my spidey sense was a little bit put off when I heard them talking about it. But basically what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to, like, you're with this therapist, and like, say you've got a problem. The example that Slate Star Codex gives is like, say you've got a problem like where you always seem to self-destruct when you start a new intimate relationship. And so you kind of go into this like trance-like hypnotic state, and you're supposed to find within yourself the part of yourself or the person within yourself that is sort of causing the problem. And then you let that person identify as a name or even like an object, like a snake, like David just said. And then you let that person talk through you to discover the therapist or like interviews and interrogates this sub person within you about why they're doing this. And then hopefully you can convince them that they don't need to do this self-sabotaging behavior anymore. But it's all very, positive and good vibes only sort of thing. But the problem is that they kept bumping into things that did not identify as part of the person and then would self-identify as demons. And that this kept happening over and over again.
Very common issue. A very common issue.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, man, this whole spiritual realm stuff is coming back with a vengeance, and it's sort of related to the psychedelic things. And if you just probe people and try and split apart their personality into multiple personalities and encourage this like sort of trance-like hypnotic state, then like lo and behold, demons start showing up, or that there have been demons in them the whole time, and that they do not want the good of the person. Like the whole idea of
MK Ultra, because this is how we get MK Ultra, okay?
So
and then another part of that was, wasn't it that the practice had to be passed down to somebody?
Yes.
And so that's weird to me, only in that I would imagine you have to pay for this. So it's like paying for sponsorship, but like also summoning demons. So that sounds very weird.
And at some point it's like when are we just going to admit that the Christians had this demon thing figured out? And it's weird, like lurking in the background of that article was like, well, the Christians have been talking about demons this whole time, and they seemingly have a system of how to beat these demons, because these internal family systems people, they seemingly sometimes could exorcise a demon, but they're like trying to persuade it to go away. And they're like, hey, demon, look up. There's light above you. Just go up to the light and leave this person alone. And like that would sometimes work. But then you exorcise a demon, and guess what happens after you exorcise a demon? Well, more demons come back. What does that sound like? And then another thing that they figured out is like, you need to ask a demon where they are in the hierarchy of the demons within the person. Because it turns out oftentimes there's lots of demons within people. What does that sound like? It's like, okay. Oh, and there's different classifications of demons. Some demons are extraterrestrials or from a higher realm. Some are the spirits of dead people from long ago. Oh, okay, wait a minute, Nephilim, right? That's what we called that. And so they have this whole hierarchy and systemization of demons that like maps perfectly onto what Christians have been saying this whole time. And like, you read the Gospels and Jesus is like, oh, well, that demon only comes out this way. Or it's like, it's so, and they're embarrassed by it. The funny thing is like they did not want this to happen, because it's showing that their system doesn't work, because they're like, only positive vibes, just like warm and affirmation, and that'll make everything better. But these demons don't seem to respond to that, and seem to be like not hoping for the best or actively oriented towards evil. And another thing that was super interesting in the article is like these demons seem to feed off of negative energy. So they get people to do things that make them feel bad, and then they feel more bad. And then the demon is able to grow off of that, and then the demon has more influence, so then they make them do more bad things, and then that feeds the demon even more, right? So it's a negative feedback loop of demon strengthening. And it's one of those things where it's like, this is both weird, fascinating, highly familiar to anyone who comes from a charismatic background, and like the fact that even these materialists are running out of options to explain what these things are and how to deal with them is showing that something in the air is changing.
Well, in polite mainstream Christianity, see Sam here or whatever says, that's one thing. Even talking about the Holy Spirit, like I was a Holy Spirit charismatic house church guy. Like you start talking about Holy Spirit and activation and stuff like that, that makes a lot of, and I'd just say they're materialist Christians, right? Yeah. In some ways, whether they would say it or not, they're almost cessationists because they're like, well, I don't see these things and I can't believe it, so I'm just gonna, it doesn't exist, right? Whatever, like there's this whole realm that doesn't have this full idea of like, yeah, there's principalities and powers, and like you said, Jesus even said, yeah, that one only goes away with prayer and fasting, guys. Sorry.
And I think, and maybe Sam, this is part of what you're getting at, the idea that like this also has to be incorporated. Like we were talking about ideas that need to be incorporated. And Sam, I even think that you're an example of this, like a seeking for consistency, and that you're asking that things be incorporated fully. And so that there's certain theological lines that a lot of Christians aren't comfortable with. And you're saying, no, you have to notice these things. And so like, I was involved in some stuff with Muslims for a while, and they are dealing with YouTube what was previously dealt with in Christianity through the printing press, which was that there are ideas that are now out there and you have to deal with them. You cannot ignore them anymore. You cannot just be sticking in your one community where these ideas are not going to come in. You are actually going to have to face them. You're going to have to incorporate them. And for some of you, incorporating them will utterly destroy you, but they must be incorporated.
Mm-hmm. Anthony asked the question, Sam, why are these demons listening and obeying therapists? In the article, it seemed to suggest that sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. And that the therapists often struggle with exorcism, and they have a whole exorcism manual, but it seemed like an imperfect science. And like oftentimes, like I said, they get rid of a demon and then more demons come back. And
isn't there that story where those guys are casting out demons, and I know Paul and I know Christ, but who are you? And then it attacks them
and makes them naked, strips them naked. That's one of the parts that that doesn't make it into the flannel graph.
But I agree with what you were saying, David, about like this is something that needs to be integrated. And you could see Slate Star Codex was like, I mean, he's a materialist and he's really doing his best at the end of this article to try and wrangle this thing back inside the materialist frame. But it was the least interesting and least convincing part of the article.
Sam,
what needs to be integrated? What part are we saying needs to be integrated? I mean,
well, he needs to put this back in. Your mind is a machine that runs on neurons and wires and firings and regions, and we need to explain it back with a materialistic way of how the brain works, and come back to that idea. And but he didn't quite have an answer for that.
Have you ever read Edith Turner, the Reality of Spirits, a taboo or permitted subject in anthropology? Have you ever read that book?
No.
Okay. Or it's a paper. It's a paper. It's not too
Edith
Turner. So she's an anthropologist. She's written like entire textbooks on it, her and her husband. But she writes this article that is so funny to me because I get the underlining tone where she's like, look, as anthropologists, we're all trying to be these like scientifically minded things, but all like minded people, but all of us who worked in the field have seen some shit that we have no idea how to explain.
And that's exactly what's going on with these internal family systems people. It's like, we're scientists, we're materialists, we're therapists, we're using like science and like good psychology ideas. And the thing is it seemed like everyone was encountering the same phenomenon, and they were mostly shut up and quiet about it. And then they would start whispering to each other, hey, have you ever like had one of your patients say that they were a demon? And then like it turns out like all of them have had this experience, and then they start like secretly trying to share techniques and ideas about this, but they're embarrassed and don't want to admit it. Well, and then this book finally comes out. It's like, guys, we just like need to talk about this. Apparently, we tried to fix people, and they had demons inside them.
So Edith Turner is at this. She's investigating this tribe in Africa, and this woman she thinks is like schizophrenic, and then they do an exorcism at night around this big campfire, and she sees what she describes as looking as though it's a creature comes out of the girl's back that looks like it's either made out of shadow or smoke, hovers above for a few seconds, and then takes off into the night. And you can, while she's writing about this, you can tell that she wants to swear. You can tell that she's just like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with that? Like, I want to be a scientist. I am trying so hard. And you see, and I'm separate. I'm the scientist analyzing this, but then a creature made out of shadow or smoke comes out of someone's back and takes off into the night, and then the girl was in her right mind. What am I to do with that, right? Like,
yeah. And it's funny, like what I think was Jess or Lance saying this, that there are many kinds of Christianity that aren't even ready to deal with this. There are two kinds of Christianity that are here for it. It is the Pentecostals, and it is certain branches of Catholicism that were always into this stuff, right?
Well, and Orthodox do exorcisms too, right? So that thing, yeah.
Well, and also it's a Western world thing. We like you go overseas. Like I remember I was in I was in Costa Rica, and this woman was saying, you know, we're gonna maybe go over to her house. She's like, yeah, we can't go over to our house right now because my sister's there and she has a demon. And she said it just sort of like flat out. And this is a Christian woman, and like, yeah, she's like acting out and stuff. We don't know how to get the demon out of her. And we're just like, okay. and so it's just
I don't want to go over to your house either, come to think of it.
Yeah. But she just sort of said it matter-of-factly. And so I was just sort of like, yeah. But like the pastors and Christians that I ran into like around the, you know, the third world and just non-Western places were pretty much comfortable in those areas, casting things out.
And people are saying Western, non-Western, but Pentecostalism is about as American a form of Christianity as they come. So I'm not quite sure. I kind of agree that it's a Western, non-Western thing in that, you know, third world, global south, whatever the right phrase is, these things are much more commonly accepted and not taboo and frequently encountered. But, you know, Pentecostalism, to give it its due, it like started in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So, you know,
so there's a bit where we oftentimes it's stopped in the quote on "Don't sleep, there are snakes." Like Paul keeps on referencing this thing where they talk about the god on the side of the river. What sometimes gets forgotten, and Michael was posting a video on part of what happens after that, is after he tells the people about Jesus, they don't want anything to do with Jesus because Jesus has showed up to the village and is trying to sexually assault people. And he's just like, the guy, he knows that they're not lying, but he's like, was someone pretending to be Jesus? What was going on? And it never enters his mind that there is a spirit pretending to be Jesus who is now appearing as an evil entity. That doesn't enter my mind at all as a possibility.
I was hoping that PBK would actually interview that guy at some point. He's still alive. I think his name is David something or other.
Just
Yeah,
to,
and I
None of this stuff should shock us. I mean, we grew up on Ghostbusters.
well, about the Pentecostals, like I wasn't like totally immersed in Pentecostalism, but I did my rounds, and like the Pentecostals are still slightly buffered just because of our world and culture. Like I got into I would describe myself, I guess, as charismatic, growing up charismatic because of the type of environment. It was Holy Spirit, tongues, slaying in the Spirit, casting, taking spiritual world seriously, casting out demons, that kind of stuff. But even like a lot of charismatic Western people, when we got into these situations in India or wherever, like it was a whole different thing. Like it wasn't like the spiritual reality that the Pentecostals lived in. It was something different that the Christians there were more versed and comfortable in.
Yeah. Slate Star Codex talked about how, well, perhaps a really good way to treat demons is to just not believe in demons because it's basically a suggestion thing. And if you're suggesting to people that demons exist, then lo and behold, a certain kind of person, a highly suggestible, somewhat borderline personality already, lo and behold, they'll start acting like a demon. So just don't suggest to them that demons are a thing and you won't get any demons. And that maybe materialism is sort of a good fence against demons. And I'm like, in a certain sense, I actually kind of agree with what he's saying. Like part of the reason why the Western world doesn't have a lot of this stuff is because of its kind of more materialist metaphysics. And in a certain sense, there probably is more mental sanity because of that. But I was thinking that the cart and the horse might be a little bit different than what he was suggesting. I think that because the West was so Christianized and that Jesus drives out the demons, that it's sort of, and that Christianity sort of in like a Tom Holland Dominion sort of sense is like a evangelization of mental sanity in addition to being other things. That because the West was so kind of sane spiritually for a while, it became easy to not believe in demons because, St. Patrick had scared away all the snakes. Jesus had scared away all the demons in Western culture for a long time. And that when we're bumping up against these cultures that aren't as thoroughly Christianized, we were seeing things that we hadn't seen in a long time and we didn't know what to make of it. But what I think is happening now is that Christendom is breaking down. And as soon as Christendom starts breaking down, lo and behold, the demons are at the gate ready to come back. And they come in through weird and unexpected doors like psychedelics and internal family systems and other weird stuff like that.
There's another one, which is there's a documentary called The Nightmare, and it's about sleep paralysis and specifically the characters. And I felt similar, Sam, about that topic because the people who speak about sleep paralysis will tell you if you talk about it too much, people will get it.
Yeah.
So that it actually can spread. But when they start describing what is experienced in this documentary, like it's terrifying, and it's just people describing their
a demon. Yeah. I've heard
very clearly characters made out of shadow with glowing red eyes
that paralyze them right before they're about to fall asleep, and then they can't breathe, and they feel like this demon is sucking in everything. And
sometimes they feel claws into their skin, and
or a pressure on their chest, or
And in the documentary, if you just watch it, the guy is not a Christian. One person in the group no longer suffers from sleep paralysis, and it's a girl who wasn't a Christian, but while one of the times it was happening, says, "I heard somewhere that there was power in the name of Jesus," and claims the name of Jesus, and she's the only one in the documentary who no longer faces the sleep paralysis.
And lurking in the background of this Slate Star Codex article is the name of Jesus, because he's like, well, I was reading about China once upon a time in like the 1800s, and there was all sorts of demons and stuff like that. And the only people that would reliably be able to deal with the demons were the Christian missionaries. And that these Chinese people learned to seek out the Christian missionaries because they were the only people who had any reliable demon or power over the demons. And like, so in a culture that is not very deeply Christian, where a lot of Chinese people in the 1800s might not know anything about Jesus, literally never heard of anything about Christianity. You know, and word quickly spreads that these Christian missionaries are the only people who have some sort of secret.
Have you guys dealt with demons?
Not personally, but my dad has quite a bit. My dad was in the like 60s and early 70s, before he was a Christian, was very into psychedelics and new agey stuff and hypnosis and things like that. And he will say that he was basically playing with demons and that he was doing this because he was bored and it was fun or interesting, like a lot of, you know, bored hippie kids at that time did. And that that this was part of what led him to charismatic Christianity. And that after he became a Christian, he had to exorcise demons out of a lot of his friends and stuff like that. And that it worked.
Anyone else?
I've just had the boring one where I'm like being hit by a horrible and terrible feelings of some kind, and then without even knowing it, a friend, like, I'm going through this huge depression. It's like massive things coming at me. It's terrible. And then all of a sudden it all goes away. And then a friend tells me that they're praying for me at that moment. And they don't know why. It's just like randomly in a day that they're praying for me. And then it just so happens to be the exact same time that something like this is changing.
Yeah, for me, like Chad, it's like everything. Like, I'm very charismatic, but I also was always highly suspect when I was in charismatic circles that there were things that were going on that weren't like true actions of the Spirit, let's just say, right? So you get both going on. So I also think with respect to this, if you spot a demon everywhere, not everything's a demon. But I think there certainly are those instances. So if you'd asked me, Chad, like when I was in treatment, you have to write a bunch of letters, right? One of the things that I really, and I believe this to this day, is my addiction certainly was a demon that wanted me dead. And kept taking me to places to the brink of death, whether that be I would kill myself or do things that could bring that on. I also was in certain places, like I know the difference between being around people that are addicts and it's kind of just people would feel a darkness, but I have been around certain people, and it was during that time of my life where I put myself in those areas around certain people where I knew immediately this person is dangerous and dark and I need to get out. You know what I mean? Like I just knew that there was something going on. Like there was an evil there. So for me, those are some of my experiences with it. But I need to make sure I don't see demons everywhere because they are everywhere. There's other things, but also like, I've always realized this with Christianity. Like if you're going to be a Christian, there's a lot of crunchy, wild stuff that comes along with that. You better just embrace it.
I got attacked by 3 demons one time.
Tell me.
It was in Costa Rica. We were out in this tiny village out in the middle of the nowhere. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling absolutely terrible. But like as I'm waking up, I had 3 demons over me, one in my head, one at my torso, and then one at my legs. And they're doing whatever they're doing. They're hurting me. And so then I kind of wake up and they dissipate. So I'm like, well, you know, I'm curious what all that was, but I start getting pretty sick. And the next day we were supposed to go to another village. So we go to the next village and I'm like just laying down in the back of this pickup truck. Like I've got stomach issues. I've got like all these sores inside my mouth and on my lips. And then my legs are aching. My back is aching. You know, nothing too crazy. Basically, like flu symptoms, but I had these sores in my mouth too. And then, so anyway, the following day, they end up taking me to the hospital in a nearby town. So we go into the hospital, and they diagnosed me with 3 different things. I had a stomach problem. I had a stomach bug. I had actually like a flu virus, and then I had turned out to be like an allergy, a food allergy to mangoes. Produced all the sores in my mouth. But it was funny because when I went to the hospital, I didn't tell them any of that, of course, but it was 3 demons, and then they diagnosed me. They're like, yeah, you have 3 things kind of going on. And then they gave me a shot and some medicine, and yeah.
Wow,
Well,
that's quite a story.
Yeah, it is. I just want to ask selfishly, I guess, that if what you're saying is true, that somebody's praying for you, that they go away. I want to ask anybody out there, pray for me, because I've been dealing with a lot of my own stuff I don't want to talk about, but and I don't know, it's really weird because this topic seems to have been coming up at the very least since Saturday, when they talked about when I was talking with those people, and they talked about spiritual warfare and stuff. And so, is it a coincidence or anything like that? All these talks about possession and stuff are coming up, and I don't think about this is not a topic that I ever really consider, really. But yeah, I don't like asking people to pray for me, but I would appreciate it.
I will. I definitely will. Okay, Chad?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And like the thing is, yeah. Can a demon be with you for a lifetime?
Kim, what?
Can a demon be with you for a lifetime?
Seems plausible.
Maybe.
In the Slate Star Codex article, some of the demons claim to have been generationally passed on within a family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and when this came up, Chad, because you were in here, I immediately was thinking of Legion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, even the idea of household gods, like one of the things to remember is the term god and the term demon are the same, right? Like that you could have household demons essentially,
Yeah.
where, yeah.
Sorry to make it weird. I needed to ask because otherwise I don't want to ask.
No, this is exactly right. I'm really glad the direction this went in is because we talk so hypothetical that it's just like, no. If the world is weird and we're a group of people, I actually think this is very encouraging, is that if you want evidence for the spiritual realm, you gather a group of people that believe in it and you say, okay, who has a story where this happened? And this used to be a part of church. Right, where people would share these stories and that they encouraged people. Like that's one of the reasons why stories of saints are written down, to encourage and inform us on how the world works.
Well, and this goes back to the thing Jess was talking about, where it's important to have a spiritual father, a sponsor, a disciple leader, or something like that, is you should share these stories about things and have people with good discernment. I guess what I was thinking about there, Sam, would be maybe discernment, like discern the spirits. Like sometimes it is this thing, sometimes it's not that thing. And having people around you who are for you and you trust to help you discern these things to try and figure this stuff out. Because, on your own, I get to say myself, like, on our own, we can concoct about anything, right? And it's important to have that check. And like in your tradition, Sam, that's why you had people that were the people who interpreted tongues, right? Because they had it shown at a bit, they had trust. There was a trust that had been built up amongst the congregation that the wacky person's not going to come up and say these wild things like, hey, we all where the spaceship's going to all take us up, whatever. And so we're all going to get together and put on our Nikes and drink the Kool-Aid sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Right. And I've been thinking, so like, how exactly did Jesus's crucifixion beat the demons? And like, what exactly is the source of that? Like, how does that even work? How do we even think about that? Because I think the comfort that Christians should have is that we don't need to beat the demons ourselves, that Jesus beat the demons, and that we don't need to use our own strength to have to beat these spiritual powers, because that won't work. And there's people all over the world who have been trying to beat these spiritual powers with their own strength and like feel defeated and captured and controlled and scared. But Jesus beat the demons, and then through Jesus's victory, by allying ourselves with Jesus, recognizing him as Lord, he helps us beat the demons too. But it's like, how exactly does that work? I don't know. It's a crazy thing.
Is magic an option? Can we put magic on the table?
I'm fine with magic. Yes.
I don't want to get into the fine points, because I think this does exist within Protestant thought too. I'm not trying to do ortho Protestant, but I'm just, so for example, like when you come in and you're baptized and chrismated, like literally that portion is kind of considered an exorcism in Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I really love about it is you actually spit on Satan. Like you come in, you denounce it, and you spit. And I love seeing people spit, and it's like, I like that. The picture just makes me I kind of giggle when I see it too. Like I have that reaction, and I just love it. But there is an effect about going to the baptism, and then the chrismation is the sealing of the Holy Spirit. Like, and so listen, I think there's like these things that Christ has revealed, like baptism, right? Which is good. Let's don't worry about what happens at it, but there's this shared belief that there's power in baptism, right, Sam? I think that could be a mere Christianity sort of thing. And I do think that there are actually doing some of these revealed practices that Jesus has given us, like there is power and effect to that. And I don't want to get down on the weeds. That's not the argument. But I think there is some form of, protection with that. And I think we seek out, for us, I think it's, if we were having these conversations where we read it out about it, and we were going to people with good discernment, like we would continue, like that'd be a natural part of our Christian life, right? Like, hey, I got this. Is this a demon? It's like, well, I don't think it's a demon. Like, I think, whatever. Or, wow, this is what, like people who've seen it and know it, because like, Jesus talked about, you don't know the Holy Spirit because you don't know how to look for it or recognize it, whatever in John. I think there are spiritual people that have like, oh wow, like I know what this is. You know what I mean? Like they know exactly what that is. And so I love the crunchy bits. Like this is the crunchy bits of Christianity, right? And if we're gonna believe in a resurrected Christ and all these other things and the invisible and all this other sort of stuff, like of course this stuff is real.
Yeah, well, I think it has to do with authority.
And even the materialist, like the article, I can't read it, Sam, but even the materialist therapists are recognizing it's real, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to do with authority, like Jesus, like that's how it's talked about, at least in the Gospels. Jesus gives his disciples authority. He has the authority to do these things, and then there's people that don't quite have the authority in certain situations. And then, and it's interesting because you get the idea that the demons have to listen to Jesus, and they're kind of like fighting and whatever, but they ultimately have to like listen to him, which is kind of strange. You'd think like one of them would just be like, I'm not doing what you're telling me to do. What happens then? Like, we don't see that example. So it's like always sort of like Christ has this sort of like final say. Even there was like, I forget what the context was, but I was reading something where they were talking about people were experimenting with kind of occult type stuff, and they were trying to do it as sort of secular materialists, whatever. But they found out that they could get stuff to happen, but it wouldn't really work if there was a crucifix around. And so there was one situation where they had invited a new person to kind of see what they were doing, and they were trying to do this one thing that was successful before, and it wasn't really happening. And it turned out she actually had just like a cross on a necklace tucked under her shirt. And they asked her, they're like, do you have a crucifix on you? And she was like, yeah. And then, you know, maybe this is a, you know, a urban legend thing or whatever, but
It's a good legend. Keep going.
but there's something about like even the sign of the cross, there's something about all that actually has power and authority. We're in sort of our secular materialism, we're sort of like, we have the worldview that authority just sort of emerges out of like arbitrary social structures, and we do it to organize certain things or whatever. And so like when it comes to demons, we're like, we don't really believe in authority. And then, but it seems like that's one of the key things, at least.
I was listening to someone and they were doing astral projection, and it was very interesting to follow their videos. They're off YouTube now, but for a period of time you could find these videos where this guy's experimenting with this stuff. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what spiritual component of this is legit or whatever. So he was doing this thing, and if you don't know how astral projection works, he would ask someone an address, and he would try to astrally project, go out of his body to see these places, and then he would describe them to people to see if he was doing it legitimately or if it was just in his head. And he could describe people's cottages. He would describe people's cottages that he had never been to, okay, and stuff like that. But what happens is he becomes curious about aliens, and he wants to see one of these characters, and he believes he sees a demon. And he has this encounter that he doesn't know how to explain, that all of a sudden, when you're doing this stuff, people can't see you. He says, this thing knew I was there, hated me to my absolute core. And then he wakes up and he's like, I don't even believe in Christianity, but I think I need an exorcism. And this is how he becomes a Christian. He becomes a Christian because while astral projecting, he encounters a demon. This was like, and I went through a bunch of things that are basically lost to YouTube at this point. People's firsthand experiences of how they became a Christian by accidentally encountering demons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's that lady who, I forget, has she been on PVK's channel or she's been around? She was like super into psychedelic stuff, and then basically had
Emily Verdun, Mud Hut.
Sherry.
Oh, right. It's too many people. It's also my
I've heard both of those. I know who both of those people, and that's actually also not who I'm talking about. I'm trying to remember some other person. There's too many
people have dabbled in pharmakia, because remember, again, psychedelics would be labeled as the occult in the New Testament. Pharmakia have these experiences. Sorry, Sam, continue.
No, that's okay. And yeah, they encountering too many demons and these things out there that seem real, that seem like not yourself, and that this starts to break down materialism, gets scary, and then you need help. And this idea lurking in the back of every Western person's mind is that they know where the help against the demons is already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll find her name. She wrote a book, I believe, recently. I should interview her. That would be a good interview.
Well, I think, and the other thing I think that, Paul talks about school spirit or whatever, and I shared that thing Luke shared, that there's spirits or demons or principalities and powers when he's talking about mammon and, kind of what I started this out with, like I think both the right and the left or the conservative or liberal, whatever you would think about in church, like there are these spirits that can come in, principalities and powers, right, that can shift us in certain ways, and I think they have in the church in the United States, right? I'm not speaking about all Christians in every church, but there have been these major movements, right, that I think that gets back to this, like, something's missing, the meaning crisis, the collapse in the church, right? I think all this stuff, like this
I really want someone to say this is why they were part of the movement, because no one ever says, oh, I was part of the Young, Restless, and Reformed because that's what the spirits made me do. right? They always have this internal, oh, I was thinking of this or I was thinking of that. It's just like, no, I was possessed momentarily, and that's how I got into the charismatic movement. You
I
had to
think
be
that's-
there.
I think that's interesting. So when we hear people's stories, like I know Jess, you spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think some people. So now let's start talking about principalities and powers. I think I definitely have heard, whether it's explicit or not, people had gotten caught up in the spirit or the principality of certain worldviews, and then ultimately, that caused them to go to some sort of existential crisis, and then they ended up coming back in and seeking that. I think you've heard that. Would you agree, Jess? Like, isn't that a part of it?
How so? Like,
Well, just like ultimately they got up in the spirit of this thing. Like,
Oh,
so
yeah.
I could even think about something like Paul Kingsnor's story. He went through the end of Zen Buddhism, but really he started practicing Wiccan. And when he was starting to practice Wiccan, all of a sudden what started happening to him is Jesus just kept bothering him, and like he didn't want the reality of it to be Jesus, because it's like the exact opposite of what he wanted to be. And then ultimately Jesus is like, you keep seeking this thing, and it's me. You know what I mean?
mhm.
And he was getting sick when he was going to the Wiccan stuff or whatever. So I do think that people are realizing, like, I think you'll find a lot of people that might have pressed deep hard into, I'm just using rough terms, this woke nihilism, and they find themselves at an existential crisis, and then they come back into, or they come out of secular families, and now they're finding their way into churches. Like, I do think that people reach the end of certain spirits and principalities, because I do believe, like what Luke was pointing out, is like, guys, there are principalities and spirits in these certain things that are in our culture, right? That,
Mhm.
you could almost go to the level of like, if I were Satan or I were a demon, these are the hidden things that I'd love to get you in love with, these sorts of things, and believing, these ideologies, so to speak.
I'm really, really glad that this conversation has gone in this direction. When we were talking about church movements, I didn't know that we would be getting into personal demon stories and everything. Guys, I've had a great time. I'll continue to listen, but I'm stepping out. See you.
Right, see. One quick thing I
Hezi.
want to hear from Hezi. I think there's like these spirits of the age, and they're sort of like over the, let's say, the country, rather than like actually like talking to me specifically or influencing me as an individual specifically, but it's over like an area, and so like, when you I don't know, you go through those things, I think, and there's something like, there's sort of a dark night of the soul where you're like, oh, this thing's gonna destroy us all, but as you continue to trust in the Lord, trust in Christ, like you end up going through those things, and then because you go through it, you've God gives you authority in those areas or something like that. And you hear people about going through something, and then they're able to speak into people's lives that are going through that same thing in a way that they have authority. And this gets back to like having fathers, spiritual fathers, that will guide you through something like that. Anyway, that's my Hezi. What's going on, man?
I'm fine, thank God. I hope you guys are doing well. Before we jump into the demons, I just want to say it out loud. I mean, I know we all appreciate Chad. You guys have to realize, as someone that comes from this world, the amount of care and effort he's putting in to make sure that the floor is leveled, that it's clean, the grout is clean, that it's the right color. You guys don't understand. Like, for me, seeing this kind of work is so beautiful. It's so much care, and it I don't know if everyone notices this, but like all this is for a reason and a purpose. And so many people try to take the short way out, and and then you end up having like a flood in your bathroom, and that's obviously like a metaphor also to many other things in one's life. So we should all try to be as meticulous and caring as Chad is. Now, do I have comments with regards to the design? Sure. No, but that's me. And you know what?
I agree.
Yeah, I don't think Chad's the designer on this one.
It's always good to go for like a very hardcore Moroccan tile and then go for like, a classic like penny tile inside the bathroom. That fusion. Honestly, that's the kind of floor, if I had like an 80-year-old client, I'd be nervous that like they'd start getting like I don't know, go into like spasms or things like that if they see the floor. But either way, the demons. So I'll start with I mentioned some wild stories over here. So and I believe there's also some Christian references to this in the Testament of Solomon. But in the Talmud, they talk about how King Solomon, he's running the show, and it's time to build the temple. The problem is you cannot use tools that become impure, unholy, which metal is one of them. So how am I going to cut these rocks down? And so I need to find a special magical worm called the shamir, and the shamir could cut through stone. They actually found a kind of worm like this a few years ago, which is quite fascinating. Either way, it cuts through stone. So how am I going to find the shamir? He comes and asks, how am I going to find them? He figures out that the demons know where the shamir is. He finds these two lowly demons. He grabs them and tells them, you guys need to tell me where I could find this shamir. And they say, the only place that has the shamir, the only place where the shamir is, and he's being hidden by this chicken that lives by the ocean. And the chicken that lives by the ocean is guarded by Ashmedai, who is the king of the demons. So Solomon sends his head of the army, his chief advisor, and he goes and he finds that he needs to make sure Ashmedai is out of the way. So Ashmedai has this special well of water that has a seal on it. So the advisor goes underneath the well, digs out the well, drains the water, and fills it with wine from underneath. And when the demon comes back, he notices that the seal's not broken. He opens it up, he starts drinking, he gets drunk. The second he gets drunk, the advisor jumps out and he has a seal with the tetragrammaton on it, Solomon's ring, and he locks up the demon. The demon gives him the chicken gives him the worm. The chicken feels like he failed his purpose and he kills himself. It's very intense. And they're on the way back to the temple. On the way back to the temple, Ashmedai is showing the advisor that he shows him that he's telling the future. There's different stories that he's telling him, but eventually he meets Solomon and they build the temple. At some point, Solomon's stomach is hurting him. He's not feeling well. And the demon is like telling the people that are running the jail, like, I am anticipating these things happening to Solomon. So eventually Solomon asks to see him. And he says, like, I'm not very impressed by you. And Ashmedai says, like, well, you're not impressed by me because you're wearing the ring of the tetragrammaton, and that's why you're so wise, right? If without that, you'd be nothing. So Solomon's like, no, you can't. There's nothing you could tell me that is going to shock me. So Ashmedai says, well, let me show you this. There's a place in the center of the earth called Tevel. And he whips out a man from this other dimension, and this man has two heads. And Solomon bugs out a little for a second. And when he bugs out, his sense of a commitment to God sort of gets challenged a little. And he says, I'll take off the ring if you show me other such things. And the second he takes off the ring, it says that Ashmedai expands his wings and flings Solomon into the desert and shapeshifts into Solomon. And they say all the bad things that Solomon did in the Bible were really during this shape-shifting period. So he sleeps with all the wives. I guess McMo asked if it had to do with the wives. So I guess it does have to do with the wives. They sleep with all the wives. Some even say he sleeps with his mother. And Solomon is walking around the desert. Some say this is also when he's writing some of his beautiful poets and his writings. He's walking around. No one's taking him serious. And eventually he manages to convince some people to check the kingdom and say, see if the king slept with his wives during the period of purity when he's not allowed to. And secondly, demons, they always have to be connected to the ground. And that's where that's their holiness, basically. Well, they're not holy at that point. So check if Solomon ever takes off his shoes. The answer was he's always wearing socks because really he had chicken legs. And once they figure this out, they use the ring again, they lock him up, and they kick Ashmedai away. Now, The reason I'm mentioning this crazy story is because the Talmud talks a lot about different demons, different mother demons. There's Lilith, there's Nama, and some of them are demons that come to you at the middle of the night. Some of them are demons that are when you travel. So it would seem that, generally speaking, these were ideas and concepts and things that sort of took over us, that we were trying to find the proper wording to sort of deal with this kind of phenomenon. Now, that I'm not trying to trivialize it. You could have psychotic states that are completely crippling, right? So these things could still fully take over you in a certain sense. The question is, are they some other creature? So Maimonides, being the rationalist, in theory comes on and says it's all gobbledygook. However, later on, he does talk about how there are things that exist that look like humans, but they don't have God's image. And those are references, like those are those other kind of demons in a certain sense. And that's something that was built in twilight before the Sabbath. So it was like a last second thing that sort of was created in the world. And you could look at that concept as a human that's not fully complete, right? Like Solomon releasing the ring of the Tetragrammaton is sort of is exposing yourself to the elements, right? Not protecting yourself under like a religious frame, or dealing with these things in the middle of the night or during doubt. So these are times when we know as humans we are very susceptible to exterior forces. So those are my two thoughts on demons.
I'm glad you shared that story. That was awesome.
Yeah.
So did the worm help build the temple?
The worm helped build the temple, yes.
So what happens to the worm after the temple's built? These are my questions.
First of all, that's a great question. He asked me as well. When he was done, he's like, people were talking about overtime. I was like, years. Also, my master killed himself, so where am I supposed to go? Is there like a room here for me? No, I don't know what happened to the Shamir
He's
later.
in some garden
you know what?
somewhere.
That's not true. They used the Shamir later again in the chest plate of the high priest. Then in each one of the stones, the gemstones was the name of one of the tribes. And in order to laser cut the name of the tribe in the stone, they used the Shamir. But there was a rabbi that came out saying that the story of Solomon is really it's a sneak peek in a certain sense of what happens to brilliant minds, so to speak, like being schizophrenic in a certain sense, or dealing with like tension. You know, the man that's talking to animals, he might have some demons of his own. You know what I mean? So
yeah, because that whole thing happened to Nebuchadnezzar, right? He gets sort of possessed and goes out into the wilderness, or something similar. He doesn't like have himself be replaced by a demon. You remember that story? Like Nebuchadnezzar basically loses his mind.
Yeah, I remember him going crazy, but I don't remember him being possessed by something.
He goes out he's not possessed, I guess, maybe not.
But I mean, a demon. There's a category for demon. However, there's the whole there's Saul, right? And his
I was just going to ask about Saul.
For sure. So I mean, that is for sure someone dealing with depression. I mean, that's what's so beautiful about the Bible, which is not everyone's a hero, right? Like the whole story of Judges is like it's all a microcosm in a certain sense in Samson, right? Like we have many issues, and we had issues with David, and we had issues with Saul as well, right? So dealing with that deep depression, and I think it's beautiful that the Bible lets us know about that, really stresses that, make us be aware of those conditions.
Yeah, I think you already answered this, but Saul, when he disobeys the Lord, he ends up, it says the Lord sends an evil spirit to torment him, bother him, and then David plays the music to kind of ease his suffering. But but then when David disobeys and sleeps with Bathsheba, kills Uriah the Hittite, Nathan comes to him and says, you're not rejected, but this curse is on you. The sword will never leave your family. And so there's these two different ways that God handles Saul and God handles David. And it seems to be that, well, I don't know, like when Saul is rejected, he doesn't step down. He hangs on to the kingship. And I think that's part of the torment. He's trying to hold on, but he won't obey the Lord. And then David, he really doesn't want this bloodshed to happen. But you even see, like, when Absalom comes into the city and is going to take over as king, David just leaves. And you see kind of a shift in the narrative at that point where it seems like David gets people treat David favorably as he's leaving in ways that we hadn't seen as he was king and kind of up too high. And so, I don't know, a couple thoughts on that. It's just interesting.
Those are all great insights. And so first of all, yes, there's a difference, which is Saul wants it, even though he can't have it anymore. And David is not asking for it and is willing also to release it. And people realize that. And God himself, of course, realizes this. Of course, the crescendo is with Saul and Samuel, right? When he grabs the coat and the coat rips, and he tells him, like, just like you rip the coat, so God will rip this away from you. And he still can't. He still denies it right now.
Right.
By the way, so once he disobeys God, in a certain sense, he is, and I'm using this word purposely, he is disconnecting himself from that harmonious flow that God bestowed upon him. And that's why listening to music is calming to him, right? That is a return back to some sort of melody, some sort of structure. But once I realize I don't have that in me anymore, like, I'm very upset about that. So much so that I'm gonna throw my spear at David. Now, David, the second he hears from Nathan that he messed up, he's like, "You're totally right. I'm sorry." He bends down, he bends the knee, he repents, and that's why the Talmud says David didn't sin, because he repented, and that's the expectation. But Saul, but Saul goes to the witch of Endor, asks to bring up the ghost, right? And then he realizes again, but she says, "I'm man with a coat," and he knows immediately, like, oh, it's the guy with the coat. And there's a whole, I mean, that's a whole transitional object from, like, a.
Oh, I didn't think about that. It's the man with the coat. That's
I mean, that's the coat his mother makes him to Samuel when he's a baby. She gives him a coat. She rips the coat. He's known as the man with the coat. You know what I mean? If you saw him walking around with a coat, they'd be like, "Where's your usual coat?" So he already realizes, how far he's fallen. So I definitely think there's a difference there. Like, you're right with how they're being punished. And I mean, you see, you were saying about David handling sort of Absalom well. It's the same thing also with Achitophel, who also David, like, says, like, "Oh, he's giving me a lot of advice," and really this guy was trying to kick him out of the kingdom. So David really is not looking for the kingship, is not looking for the glory. He is looking to dance in front of the ark, right? And again, connected to the music. When they finally get the ark back, he's like, "Oh, this is amazing," right? He's in his tent and the ark is in a little tent next to him. And then he goes out and he's like, "Well, now I have the ark. What am I supposed to do?" So he goes to the Levites and he says, "Sing a new song." And the attitude is like, it needs to be like a level up. Like, I need something. We don't have a temple yet, but we need to create something new and express more to God. And that's what was beautiful about a new song, in a certain sense. Like, I need something new, which obviously culminates in the temple, of course. But his connection.
Is this related to Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, when he talks about the secret chord and all that stuff, or what? Or am I off there?
The chord that pleased the Lord, right? So he knew the sequence of the chords that pleased the Lord, being God, but also referencing, in a certain sense, also the king, Saul, right? Because when he would play the music, he would chill. Of course, they talk about, I saw her bathing on the roof, things like that. I don't know if David was humming that song at that time, but
You never know. You know, when you were talking about that worm, that worm, it was making me think. There's an old episode of Radio Lab, I think, and it's called From Tree to Shining Tree. And what they find is that the forest is connected, not by its roots, but not by the roots of the trees, but there's a layer of fungus underneath the forest. And that fungus actually, it will eat through rocks and deliver the minerals in the rocks to the trees so that they can get the nutrients that they need. And so the trees in the forest won't exist or can't exist without that layer of fungus under the forest. Otherwise, the trees will only be about 12 inches tall. So it's interesting, and I was thinking about that. And then when you started talking about instruments and music, I was thinking about how oftentimes instruments are made from wood. And I was wondering, is there any sacred connection in your tradition as it relates to trees and instruments or things like this?
Well, we definitely don't like the Asherah tree, and we got to get rid of that thing quick. That's definitely. I mean, I'm talking about it from a religious perspective. There's a whole historical perspective of why that happens, and Baal and God and all these ancient gods fighting. But so on that end, wood is not so favorable. Obviously, you have wood and gold and those different levels in the building of the tabernacle itself. But I can't tell you that. Well, again, wood, something that's natural, doesn't receive impurity, right? So I could have my forks and knives, if I put them in the wrong sink, if I use them for meat and milk, they could become impure. With wood, I never have that issue. So even when I let's say the holiday of the tabernacles of the huts, when I build a called Sukkot, so I can't build a structure like those little huts. They can't be made out of metal. So even today, when I build someone a modern gazebo with shutters, I have to leave an element. I custom design these wood elements on top, so I could, on the festival, I could put the leaves on top, because they can't be supported by something not natural in a certain sense, or that was sort of made not naturally. I will mention also, as far as the worm is also symbolic of, to build the grand temple of God, you need this small little nothing worm. That relates to what you're saying about the fungus, because you could look at this amazing house you have made out of this Canadian wood, but for that wood to be cultivated, you not a fungus. You want it anywhere near your house. Nevertheless, all these elements are needed and connected. Definitely, if you're going to try to build a temple who's going to supposedly house the master of the universe, right? So it makes sense that you would want to appreciate that even the smallest little thing is needed for you to actually build this temple.
Chad, on the topic of on the topic of special instruments within Jewish tradition, there's a tradition that so I pulled up this children's book that's from Midrash called The White Ram. And at the end of the story, it speaks of the ram that is sacrificed instead of Isaac in the binding of Isaac. And it specifically says at the end that they believe that this ram's, that his bones are in the foundations of the temple, but that his entrails were used to build the harp of David. So the idea that there's somehow a connection between the sacrifice, it's believed that Moriah would have been the place that Abraham made the sacrifice at the same place that the temple would be. So a connection between that and the instrument itself. So and the horns were taken off of that special animal, and those would be the shofars, the trumpets that would be blown at Sinai, but also at the end of the age. So
Right,
not special wood, but animal made instruments.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Correct, David. That's why. First of all, thank you for adding that. The little what is the name of the book? The Little White Ram. Yeah, that book is loosely based on my life. Anyways, the difference is, it's not a trumpet. It's a shofar, right? Unlike trumpets, it's actually something that's natural. That same foundation stone, or Mount Moriah, or so that also has to do with, that's the story also where David was building the temple. He was digging over there, and then the waters of the abyss was completely overflowing, and we're going to overflow the whole world. And he needed to, take a piece of clay and write the Tetragrammaton inside and stop it. And this is in a similar way, reminiscent of when Moses comes down with the tablets, right? Again, it's God's finger and words written on clay stones again, but they need to be shattered after the golden calf. And here you see again, like chaos emerges, and there's a certain sense where, like, if nature is left untapped in a certain sense, or left uncontrolled, then in comes the chaos in a certain sense.
Well, it's interesting how you were bringing up that the demons were the creatures created right before dusk.
Yeah.
From on the sixth day, is that also made at dusk right on the sixth day is all these animals that become miraculous and special in Jewish tradition. Balaam's donkey, the white ram. These are the animals are all created like 20 minutes before sundown, right in that in between space. These special things are created, and so it's interesting that some of them become evil, and they corrupt our world, and some of them are ways of saving the world.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave with one story. You guys,
Yeah.
okay.
One more story.
It was in connection. I was mentioning how Saul, we could see how Saul made mistakes and David made mistakes. So even Solomon, even Moses made mistakes. So Moses goes to his wife, Zipporah, and tells her, basically, I'm the man of God. This relationship between you and me is not going to be as usual anymore, right? I can't relate to you in that sense. And he gets lambasted by his sister because of this, right? She calls him out. She gets sick because of this, but regardless, she wasn't happy about what he was doing. And there's a whole deep teaching over there for a later time. So then Moses goes up to Mount Sinai, tablets number 1. It's a complete disaster, and it gets destroyed. And here too, just like Moses was sort of rejecting his wife, here too, there's a certain rejection by God of the Israelites. So Moses comes and remakes the second tablet. Now, he makes the tablets out, what the Midrash tells us, he makes it out of this very expensive diamond, sapphire / diamond. It's called Sapir Yon. And this is also how Moses was rich, because what was left over, God told Moses, you could keep. So Moses comes down with the new tablets, and that's sort of supposed to be the remarriage between Israel and God. But the Midrash also tells us that he also took one of the stones and fashioned this beautiful diamond ring. And as he comes down from the mountain, the people split, sort of like the sea, and it's him facing his wife Zipporah on the other end. And he asks for forgiveness for not realizing that, how wrong he was from leaving her. That's not the natural, that's not what should happen. And he offers her this wedding ring. And today, up until today, when we get married and we give our wife the wedding ring, we say, this ring is yours, according to the Torah of Moses. But it's a reference to the first time, the first initial proposal by Moses. And that leads to a second story of Desperate Housewives, when Korach's wife sees that her ring is 2 carats. She's not having it. She tells Korach, you got to do something about this. And that's the backstory of the Korach and his tribe coming out to Moses and calling him out. But what started it all was just jealousy. All right, guys, I'm leaving you on that note. We'll talk.
See ya.
Thanks, Hezzy. I love Hezzy's story time.
It's the best.
All right. Well, we covered a lot of ground today, everyone. Chad, anybody else any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, it's pretty good.
All right. We covered a lot of, man, we covered a lot of ground today. That's just what these TLC conversations do. So hey, Jess, what are you working on? You working on anything fun, exciting?
I'm working on some VBS animations for a local mega church. It's hilarious. It's just stories about Jesus. But so that's kind of fun.
Yeah, it pays the bills.
Yep. And I'm trying to put together some more I'm working on my music project, the Book of Job. So I'm working on that too.
All right. All right. Well, I think
All right, Lance.
We'll see you, bud.
I'll see you around.
O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with the light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind. He makes his messengers winds, and his ministers a flaming fire. He set the earth on its foundations so that it should never be moved. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they took to flight. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place where you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Beside them, the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing among the branches. From your lofty abode, you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. In them the birds build their nests. The stork has her home in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats. The rocks are a refuge for the rock badgers. You made the moon to mark the seasons. The sun knows its time for setting. You made darkness, and it is night, for all the beasts of the forest creep about. The young lions roar for their prey, seeking their food from God. When the sun rises, they steal away and lie down in their dens. Man goes to his work and to his labor until the evening. O Lord, how manifold are your works! In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here's the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures innumerable, living things both small and great. There go the ships and Leviathan, which you formed to play in it. These all look to you to give them their food in due season. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created and you renew the face of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. Who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have being. May my meditations be pleasing to him, for I rejoice in the Lord. Let sinners be consumed from the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord.